my granddaughter, she should be on a motorcycle. She's on her strider. I know. She's got her hands ready.
Let's see if she can work her way out of that one young.
She didn't like it first. She was not into her. She is such a pumpkin, this little one. She is such a pumpkin.
Good afternoon.
Hi. She said everybody's supporting her $30,000 request. City Council, Snowmass Village. Did you guys hear that?
I have not heard about that. Hey there. Hey, Rick.
What changed that he made his decision?
On record, by the way.
We're live.
Are we live?
Go.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Today is the Board of County Commissioners of Picken County work session on Tuesday, March 10th, 2020. First on our agenda is a first quarter budget supplemental request and budget update.
And Steve, if you don't mind, just before we get started, just so the board knows, the Airport Visioning Committee moved its meeting from Thursday to Tuesday. You had a curfew violation item scheduled for the end of the day. We're going to cancel that because both John Kenny and I can't be two places at once, and it's one that we can still get through the rest of the quarter before we give a final report on that. So just wanted to let you know that, and I'll be leaving a little bit before 3 o'clock to go over to that meeting.
Okay.
Sorry, thank you.
So first, a very brief budget update on 2019 budget versus actuals, and then we'll get to the supplemental request. Excuse me, the 2019 update, the information is not complete because we're still working on closing out 2019. Our process is taking a little bit longer this year just because of the ERP conversion that we had in 2019 and change in chart of accounts and some cleanup. So I do have information on general fund revenues in this memo. A little bit on general fund expenditures, and then I don't really touch on the other funds yet. We'll be providing full 2019 information as we get that complete, but did want to just give you a general idea of where we're at, especially since there were a number of changes on revenues compared to budget. And you see a chart on the first page of the memo that summarizes not all of the revenues in the general fund, but some highlights. Property tax is normally very solid. We collect 99.9% to 100% of property tax. So you can see there we're right on track for property tax. On our sales tax, 2019 sales tax collections were 22.4% greater than 2018. And a lot of that we actually forecasted when we were doing our 2020 budget. We were projecting that 2019 would be up 15%. Instead, it came in at a little over 22%. So there's even more than what we were projecting. And there's a chart on the second page. Find my cursor here. That shows, oops.
Are you adding the sales tax and PILT to get to the 22%? I'm just trying to,
No.
Am I looking in the wrong place?
Compared to budget, the sales tax is up 19.6%.
Thank you.
Compared to
Okay.
prior years, 22.4%.
All right, thanks.
So the chart on this second page just gives you an idea what the original 2019 budget was. We had projected that 15% increase in sales tax, which over the three different funds would have been almost $1.2 million. And then how much we brought in above and beyond that. So you can see the dollar amounts there. That part of it we were already building into our projections when we did the 2020 budget, but that third column shows the extra that's beyond the projection. Other things, there's some one-time revenue that's due to cleanup associated with the ERP, and as we're looking at different accounts, and it's really been quite a deep dive in many areas. So there is some one-time revenue in the amount of $278,000 that was identified for the general fund. And then the largest increase was in community development fees. And their budget for 2019 was conservative, and they had a number of large projects that ended up being closed out and settled during the year, and actually came in at $2.5 million above budget. As you know from other prior year budget processes, trying to identify a good projection for community development fees is difficult. They have very large swings year to year, and as a graph on page 2 shows the types of swings that we can have from one year to the next when we're looking at community development fees.
So, but Connie, does that also take into account our new, what's the word I wanted to say, our new charges that we implemented a year ago or so?
Yeah, George, this is reflective of the new charges. What the elasticity really reflects is just the number and size of permits that come in on an annual basis. Several projects, many of our projects are multi-year projects, so you'll collect the revenue in 1 year, but the expenditures will happen over a number of years. So the fee, which is now a percentage of the estimated project cost, while that is a consistent percentage, it didn't really address that elasticity of the building permit revenues. One of the strategies is we hold fund balance. So this, one of my cautions, and I'll give a speech at the end of Connie's presentation on this, but one of the cautions is not to necessarily view this as available money for all kinds of projects. Some of this we will want to hold and reserve to float community development through those times when the revenues are not as high. We're probably going to be coming up on one of those periods. And to also look at the sales tax in the same way, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But we had always anticipated we'd still have high elasticity. So we're on the upswing right now. We're going to expect a downturn. The idea was over 5 years or such that we kind of hit that sweet spot of development paying for itself.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and there are projects that after that 2 or 3 year period, there is a true up at the end, and if the project cost was more than what was anticipated at the beginning, then they also pay the difference, and you're seeing that reflected in 2019 numbers. So those are the main highlights. There are a few other areas where there is a little bit of extra revenue, but altogether that is $3.3 million more in revenue in the general fund compared to budget. On the expenditure side,
Connie, sorry, Connie, just wanted to clarify that on the one-time revenue, you found undistributed funds in several different accounts. That goes into the general fund. Are there any other limitations or restrictions on any of those funds? These are
No.
unlimited in terms
no,
of what
on
we
this, there are none.
Okay, thank you.
And we did have, bring in an outside consultant to help with that particular process.
Another question along that line, the Road and Bridge Fund gets certain percentage of the sales tax.
That's correct.
That's their money to spend or hang on to, depending on what they need in the
Yes,
budget.
it is, or used for new projects.
Well, properly, it's your money to spend or hold on to, and then we implement what you tell us.
And they'd have to do a supplemental request if they're, like a Christmas present of $389,000 might be able to bump up a project that was gonna be done in future years.
That's correct. Yes, so that is money that goes into the fund balance of the Road and Bridge Fund and the Capital Fund, and could be reappropriated, as we're proposing now today with the Moon Creek Road. On general fund expenditures, we do have solid payroll numbers, except for workers' comp, which has not been calculated yet. And there's a little over $500,000 in savings in general fund payroll. However, we were projecting in our budget that there would be savings. We always project a certain percentage, just knowing that there are vacancies as we go throughout the course of the year. So when you factor that in, we're really just right about on budget as far as payroll goes, about $29,000 in savings in the general fund. So that's pretty close. Other general fund expenditures, I put a percentage up, but not a number at the moment, 93.5%. That's because we're still working through a number of processes and still booking things and making sure everything is in the right place. So I don't feel confident bringing numbers and saying how much we have in savings at this point in time. We're also looking at budget carry-forwards at the moment, and we'll be bringing a resolution probably next month for the budget carry-forwards, where we will take some of those savings and reappropriate them for projects that were not completed in 2019. So that's why I don't want to put a number out there yet until we get a little bit better information on expenditure savings. So then in general fund balance, again, not taking expenditures into account, but just looking at revenue, we were estimating that we would have an unassigned fund balance portion of the general fund at $2.8 million. But with the extra revenue, that brings it up to about $6.1 million. And then, of course, we have our Tabor Reserve. We have the operational reserve and contingency, which is money held, funds held aside for emergencies, the rainy day fund, and then also certain restricted balances. So overall, we'd be going from $8.9 million total general fund balance to about $12.2 million. Any questions on this very brief update?
So if this money is kind of extra money that we want to try to hold it in reserve, or at least consider that as maybe the best thing to do with it, would we actually assign it to the operating reserve, or just have it in the unassigned balance is still kind of a reserve that?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of things that we know are coming up this year in 2020. And I think I'll let John speak to those because right now it will just go into fund balance. However, then we may decide to hold some aside or increase the operational reserve or also reappropriate some, but I'll let John speak to that.
Yeah, so just a couple of comments on this. One, this is good news, and we knew that we were estimating the sales tax conservatively because it was very unclear what the online market in particular was in our valley. The community development fees, like I said, this is a highly elastic revenue, so these are normal cycles, but they're hard to predict when they're going to happen. The word of caution for you on these revenues is that both sales tax and community development fees are highly elastic revenues. They respond very quickly and somewhat dramatically to what's happening, in our case, in the international, national, and local economies. And so the bigger the proportion these elastic revenues become of our overall revenue stream, the more sensitive we are to those swings. And so some strategies to deal with that uncertainty is to hold a little bit more in fund balance. We have a very, very healthy fund balance. We did going in with our 2020 plan. This adds to that. That said, we know we have some uncertainties. So we have that increased uncertainty on the revenue side, and we have some uncertainties on the expenditure side coming into 2020. We know that we have some unbudgeted jail and public safety improvements. Frankly, we are going into a time of probably more economic uncertainty. We're going into one of those times where we're probably going to be sensitive, and holding a portion of this fund balance with the intention of floating us through an economic correction. I think most predictions now are this one may go deep but bounce back relatively quickly. And by relatively quickly, you typically say 12 to 18 months versus 5 to 7 years, like the last recession. So from staff's perspective, we would like to be holding some of these in reserves with kind of a, while they'd end up in unassigned fund balance, Steve, right now, we're developing some plans around how that fund balance might be used. As we come out of an economic correction period, I suspect we will continue to have fund balances. At that point, I think we need to look at some of our other capital and infrastructure needs. We may want to look at those ahead of time if we're in a correction also. Whether that be our road and bridge kind of infrastructure, because oftentimes during a correction, that's the time you get the best prices to do so in the repairs. We may look at some of those strategies. But right now, I think our strategy would be to hold, kind of see what the depth and projected length of any economic correction is, and then what advantage can we take of that economic correction, being in a good cash position, and where do we want to keep our powder dry. So I would exercise caution with this good news, but it does provide us some options going into what's probably going to be a correction period.
Okay. Go ahead, Connie.
All right, then we'll move on to the first supplemental request.
I knew you were going to ask for that Tesla. I wanted to nip that in the bud.
Cybertruck for Dion.
Sorry, I was just watching a couple come out from the clerk's office who got married and they're having their picture taken in
Yeah,
Veterans Park.
I thought that looked like a wedding party over there.
We need some
I
good
was kind
news.
I know, we need
distracted
that, we
for a
need that
second.
good news in Picking County.
Well, thank you. I'm G.R. Fielding. I'm the county engineer. And during the 2020 budget cycle, the Board of County Commissioners directed staff to bring back a supplemental request at Q1 to add Maroon Creek Road to the 2020 program. The supplemental ask is for $600,000. Our engineer's estimate was about $680,000, but as we designed the projects, we realized that we probably over budgeted in a few areas, and we do have contingency if this were to come in a little bit higher. The image that you have here is on Maroon Creek Road, and you can see a lot of the water getting tracked kind of towards town from just below Highlands there, and you can see a lot of the longitudinal cracking in the road, and that's probably a bit of what can frustrate some of the road cyclists and things of that nature going through here. This project was, or at least part of it was contemplated in 2024, so really we were looking at accelerating the project. It was within the 5-year road maintenance plan. It fits in well, again, because it's a 2-inch overlay, and that's what we're focusing on this year. If this gets funded, along with this, we'll also have Glen Eagle, which is right there in that same neighborhood, the paved portions of Watson Divide, Orchard Estates, and Horseshoe Drive. One thing that Greg caught this morning when we were talking is that in my budget supplemental, I wrote 0.3 miles. It's actually 0.8 miles. It's just my oversight, so my apologies. It's a little bit over 4,000 feet that this project would be. It also contemplates adding concrete at a bus pull-off that's at the Aspen Villas area. It typically is a pond this time of year. There's not good drainage through there, and so to fix the drainage, we have to pave the area and do that. And typically, when we have bus traffic, we'll use concrete as opposed to asphalt because it lasts longer. This was part of the budget that was contemplated by the board, and I just wanted to highlight that it was in for $650,000 in 2024. So this ask is just for a little bit less than that at this time. The project would start right at the Aspen Rec Center, which is at the upper part of this screen, and then it ends just before the bridge on Maroon Creek, the first bridge on Maroon Creek Road, which is at the bottom left of this map that we have here. Aspen Highlands is, how do I get there we go. Aspen Highlands is right here. And so yeah, the north end is right up here. The Aspen Rec Center is just off of screen. And then here's where that first bridge is. This is that, you go past Highlands, you go down the big hill.
That hill's included?
Yes, yes. And this is the bus stop that I was mentioning before. Another good thing to see here, and one of the things that we realized when the project engineer was putting this project together, was that we go in and out of urban and rural cross sections, meaning that there's some places that we have got curb and gutter, other places where we have ditches, there's other places where we wish that we could have a ditch, but they've buried utilities and things like that, so we can put some curb and gutter over that to protect that. And that is the bus shelter where we're contemplating putting the concrete pull-off, the curb and gutter, and again, is a good example of the multiple cross sections. This is a section where you can, it's a little bit harder to see in this, but you can see some of the longitudinal cracking that's been filled through here. And then you can see all this discoloration. These are just different ages of asphalt that have been patched over the years. And that's why a lot of it's being contemplated as a 2-inch overlay.
Hey, GR, when you ride your bike down through there, you go on an afternoon, you're passing, or you're in the morning, in this case, passing through the shadows, and you simply can't see the potholes and the cracks. So I am really grateful for all the cyclists in the valley. Thank you for bringing this back to us.
GR, some of that looks like, just from the weight of heavy trucks driving, how it'll make a little depression and the water settles in there. Is that what typically would cause that on a road, or is it just from so many cars going over it for so many years that it actually makes a little depression where the wheels run?
So the rutting that you noticed can happen because of both of those. Here, I would probably venture a guess that it's more of the volume of traffic, because in the past 15 years, parts of that were treated with a chip seal and then a slurry seal. Or actually, no, it was just a slurry seal. And I would venture a guess that some of that slurry seal is peeled up in parts of the wheel path over the years.
Patty?
In doing this project, which I support because, it's a heavily used section of road, have we checked with utilities and with the city and with whomever to make sure they're not going to tear it up after we put it down?
We have reached out to various parts of the city. We'll reach out to the Consolidated Sanitation District and the Water Department, who also has utilities in there. From my knowledge, preliminarily, most of the rest of the utilities are probably just off the side of the road through there.
Just want to make sure that once we get a nice surface down, that somebody doesn't come in with a project and rips it all up, so.
Right.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
George?
GR, do you retill it before you do the overlay, or you just do the overlay?
This project will be 2 inches on top in certain sections, and then other sections will have a mill and fill. So we will, especially anywhere where we have the more urbanized cross section, because we can't fill in that curb line and expect it to still work the same. So we'll have to lower the profile of the road before we bring it back up.
Yeah, I just wonder, given the nature of potholes and frost heaves, is it better to retill than just do an overlay?
Depends.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the places where we have the worst potholes, what the project does do is it patches those areas. So you'll remove that whole section of asphalt and some of the gravel underneath, and then you'll replace the entire thing, and then you put a layer, one contiguous layer over top of that whole patch.
Yeah, okay.
If I could just follow on that, I don't know if it's on this hill or not, but there's this one classic big sink hole in the uphill lane that sometimes it gets paint marked so people don't hit it, but that's one of my fear points as I'm riding, because I'm keeping up my speed to get up the hill, right? You see
Yes.
that pothole.
So
Gross.
that's a perfect segue for this image, Greg. And the Aspen Highlands would be at the top of this hill, and this is where you're coming down. The soil nail wall that was added to Maroon Creek Road last year is right here. Actually, I really like this picture because you have to look very closely to see the wire meshing, and it shows that a lot of that vegetation was already coming back up in August. But the smile, the headscarp, because that was caused by a very slow-moving landslide,
Right.
and that's what those soil nails are holding up, is right here. And that whole area will be pulled out and patched as well and brought up to grade and then overlaid on top.
Okay.
And so this is about the south terminus of the project, coming down the hill. So it'll be in between where the soil nail wall was and the bridge.
So, go ahead, George.
But when do you anticipate it starting and ending, the project?
The project right now is out for advertisement, so contractors are taking a look right now to put in bids.
Yeah, I'm just curious, you think it may be finished before the Maroon Bells bus system starts up?
Ooh, I would doubt that.
Yeah, okay.
So I just want to make sure that when we're doing the new asphalt, that it goes clear to the edge of the existing, not like the CDOT did on the Crystal River where they repaved it and they made it actually narrower. They didn't go out as far as it had been originally.
Okay.
And
well,
that's caused nothing but problems for bicyclers ever since.
yeah, I don't think that we have too much area where we can give up much of the cross-sectional area here, Steve. So that's the plan.
Okay.
And then I just had one last image, and that was, this is looking south from, you would be standing right at the entrance to the Aspen Rec Center here. And you can see where the city of Aspen ended their last surface treatment with this clean line right here, and then moving beyond that. That's where our responsibility begins, and we even have a nice handy Picking County sign so you know who's in charge of it.
Know where you are.
Kelly?
Yes.
Sure. When you do a project like this, do you do a lateral section or do you do a lane at a time?
You do a lane at a time. That way you can keep one lane of traffic open while you're paving.
And what's the timeline for this again?
It'll be some point this summer. Again, we have contractors looking at the project right now. I'd anticipate us opening those proposals in April and taking a look at schedules and seeing how each of the contractors looks at fitting this into their summer work plans.
So you won't define like a 30 or 60 day or?
No, what we find a lot of times is if we give them tight windows, then they might have other work planned or something like that. So they either won't give us a price or they'll charge us a little bit more of a premium to fit them into that time slot.
Okay. Thank you.
So I have just one more question. This was scheduled for 2024. If we didn't do this project this year, what happens to the road between now and next year up till 2024. Does it get more expensive to repair it because it deteriorates?
Yes, I would anticipate that we would have had to add a lot more patching to the project. And in the interim, our road and bridge department would have been a little bit more busy on Maroon Creek Road, filling in some of the potholes as well.
Okay. And this stretch of road, you picked it where you could have picked different stretches of road in the county. You picked this one for the supplemental. Is this the area that needs the work the most?
I picked this area because that was the direction from the board when we went through budget. I would say that I would probably put this in a couple different sections of our sections of Brush Creek Road, probably in about the same place.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So you'll give us a heads up when we expect calls from the bicycle riders?
Yes.
Okay.
I know we'll send out notice and everybody will be, made aware of this ahead of time. That still doesn't mean that we will not be getting calls.
So,
be
do we have a thumbs up from everybody on this, it sounds like?
Well, we will vote on it tomorrow.
Okay,
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
thank you, GR.
Are you having Gmail issues?
How many what?
Gmail issues.
And next, we have a supplemental request from the Solid Waste Center.
That's for you, Kathy.
Did you get yours pulled up?
You need this back right
Your
now.
agenda for today?
The agenda?
Kelly can't get on.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi,
But I'm
saw you
on
this
the-
morning.
I'm just gonna be walking back and forth, just ignore
Probably.
That's fine. I work well under pressure. Okay, thank you. So this is a supplemental request, requesting an additional position at the Solid Waste Center to manage the construction demolition debris program. So as you're all aware, we've been through the past year working on a construction and demolition debris diversion ordinance and some pricing structures to encourage more diversion. This was always part of the plan for our ordinance process, and we didn't bring it in the 2020 budget last year. We got direction to bring it back once the program is launched. Well, the program is launched. The tiered pricing system that we started, we began that in January. We did education in January and February, and we actually launched the tiered pricing system last week on the 1st of March. The ordinance will be coming back to you April 8th for first reading. We're working through some final language changes. So we're launched and it's going gangbusters. So this position would be responsible for monitoring this program. There's a lot of data tracking that's required along with it, a lot of coordination with ComDev for permitting. The permits are tied to the ordinance system. Inspections, we have data tracking on software, the Green Halo software, which we've actually brought online right now. We're getting it set up. Doing outreach and education to contractors and permittees. So there's just a lot of work that the current Solid Waste Center staff can't take on. So that's what it's for.
Patty?
Yeah.
We've been very supportive of this for many reasons, and the reason I think we wanted to kick in the tiered pricing was because of this season of construction starting up. I am concerned about approving a position when we haven't approved the ordinance yet.
Mm-hmm.
I think the public needs to know that we still have public hearings, so I'm not quite sure. I know it takes a while to find and advertise and hire an employee, but I have concerns about looking like we're putting the horse before the cart, that we've already made up our minds before we've actually taken it through the process.
Mhm.
So I don't know if we do it contingent upon, I'm not sure, so you can still be looking at the position, but, we don't know where this board may stand, and public comes in and gives us good reason. We may not move forward. I think the board's been, again, very supportive, so I like some contingency brought into this, so the public knows that we are still going to be open to public discussion.
And we could certainly have it as approved contingent
I
upon
would appreciate
the
that.
ordinance being approved. I think the reason for the timing at this moment is that since we try to bring supplemental requests only on a quarterly basis.
Right, we know that they're kind of caught in the middle. But yeah, but I think the public needs to know that we will still be open to discussion and hearing from the public as this moves forward in our to-read process.
I support that, Patty, thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
This is an FTE, this full-time?
Mm-hmm,
Okay.
correct.
Just wondering if they had any extra bandwidth, and there's always projects coming down the pipe. I'm just thinking,
It's already stretching this person really thin.
Yeah.
Yeah,
what-
this
what else
person
can we
has
use
a
this
lot, yeah, this
person
position
for?
has a lot to
Just
do.
a thought. Okay, I'm supportive of this.
Okay.
I'm curious about the interaction between this person and the municipalities, because a lot of the demolition projects are in the city of Aspen, for instance, where they have their own rules, but
Mm-hmm.
will they be able to go and inspect the job sites within the city limits to give guidance on deconstruction or?
I
Sort
don't
of
know the
thing.
full laws or regulations behind that, but the tiered pricing system captures everyone outside of Picken County, and that's already launched. I can see a good education and outreach opportunity for this person to go out and help a job site on Aspen or up in Snowmass to, hey, what can we do to, decrease our trash tipping fees?
So we can't tell them they can't do the demolition in the city, but educate them on other possibilities and let them know how much they're gonna be paying to haul it all to the solid waste center.
Correct, and I see it as also a liaison between other municipalities, because I think Aspen and Snowmass are watching us. And if we make this work and is a success, I think they'll adopt it as well, hopefully.
And I think that's something we've talked about encouraging them to do, because we're all in this together, really in this together. And so without them helping us, that's an issue for our landfill in the long run.
Just, have you seen many demolition companies form or come forward with this? I think there's one that I remember hearing about in town. Are there people doing this? Is deconstruction now a thing? Are we gonna see more companies doing this?
We have one, Aspen Deconstructors, that's their whole specialty. They work with City of Aspen for the new construction they're doing. That's their whole model. I have a feeling more will step forward. I think some of them will use it as a selling point, that, hey, I'm meeting the 25% diversion for the county. As somebody who wants to do the right thing, they'll hopefully hire. So I think we'll see that, but right now we only have one.
I just hope that we have.
I think there's more emerging. I think there's
to promote it,
rumblings.
too.
Actually, in the last week, we just launched the tiered pricing system. 75% of the construction demo coming in hasn't been sorted, so they're paying that higher rate right now. There was one small construction where it's like a trailer, kind of little tiny roll-off service. He jumped on the bandwagon right away, and he has been sorting loads and bringing us sorted loads, so
That's good.
catch on. That's the purpose of it.
Yeah, it's great. It's good to hear.
Okay, so I think, is everybody in agreement with this, just so long as it's contingent upon us
And-
actually then,
Again, we'll vote on it tomorrow.
Yeah.
yeah,
Great,
thanks for bringing that up, Patty.
thanks.
The next supplemental request the board has already seen and my understanding already given a thumbs up, and that's for open space and trails for the Mather House capital improvements. Gary's here, great.
Hi, Gary.
Hello, I'm Gary Tenenbaum, the Director of Open Space and Trails, and we talked about this last week, and I just wanted to just reiterate that nothing has changed since last week. We have talked to the contractor, and we're starting to work through the contracting piece of this, and it will be the same. So if you have any other questions, happy to answer them.
I just think for the public that this is the historic Mather House that's part of the Emma property, was purchased with Open Space and Trails funds. And as part of our reauthorization of Open Space and Trails, we did dedicate percentage of monies for historic, because we are finding properties with historic structures on them that we want to maintain. So I think it's very appropriate, because that building is at the forefront, the entrance to Picken County at Emma. It's there with the old Emma store and the schoolhouse across the street. So it really is, I think, a big scenic issue for people coming up Highway 82 or leaving Pickens County if they're coming over the pass to see that little Emma right there. I think it's perfect, and I think doing it right and making it so that it's livable is appropriate.
Yep, and just to be clear on the charter was changed that we could spend money on historic
Right.
properties. We didn't put a percentage to it. We do have a policy, the Open Space Board created a policy on that to try to limit the overall expenditure of the fund by about 2%. And so, hopefully we'll see where that goes. This is the first application of that. We did the stores, we stabilized the stores before that, and that was just to maintain an asset. But now we're actually restoring this house to a livable condition and restoring it back to the original structure. And so it's going to be smaller, but it's going to be a lot more quaint. And we're looking forward to getting somebody in it because then they maintain all the area around it. And, our maintenance department is doing a good job, but having somebody actually there will do a much better job, especially since that person most likely will be the Emma Ag leaseholder. And so they have a vested interest in keeping all those properties maintained really well.
Thank you.
Okay. I've been going down memory lane a little bit, thinking about the one time I was in that house it was privately owned. It was before it was open space land, and one of my classmates was living in there. It was a family with a whole bunch of boys, and that was their home, and that was the one and only time I ever was in that
Cool.
building. So I look forward to sometime getting a tour there.
Definitely. As soon as we get this done, hopefully it will be done about late May. And yeah, before that person totally moves in of everybody, I'll just have an invite out to people and we can go down there and check it out because, it's a pretty cool structure. I mean, it was built, those store buildings at the time were extremely rare to have 8,000 square feet and a really nice Victorian house. So it was not, there was some money there at that time. Mm-hmm. And it's great that, yes, you come into Pickens County. It is so easy to tell every single contractor and sub how to get there because everybody drives by it. So we're looking forward to it.
And that was just the Emma Road that went by. It wasn't Highway 82 at that time.
Yeah,
So
the
it's a whole
road
country
was
road.
actually the bike trail now.
Yeah,
Yeah, the road
Yeah.
is the bike trail now.
yeah.
And so, yeah, Highway 82 is a little bigger.
Okay, well, I think we're all in favor of that.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Uh-oh, I licked my,
Careful, don't lick it. It doesn't stay on paper for a prolonged period of time.
Then the next request is for library door locks. When the library was remodeled, they did 2 of the doors with the electronic locking system like we have on this building, but the others were simply rekeyed with regular old-fashioned keys. They would like to go ahead and put in the electronic locks on all of the doors of the library building, and this is really a security issue. It allows them to better control the doors, make sure they're locking at the right times. And the request is for $63,000 from the library fund. We don't have any staff here to speak to this request, but if you have questions, I can see if someone can come tomorrow.
We've had security concerns about the library for some time with especially checking at night before locking the doors. So I think this will be helpful, and especially in light of rising issues about security. I think it's appropriate as long as if there's an interior fire, the doors don't lock and you can still get out. I'm fine with it.
so I remember when we were having some of our meetings up there, when we were, I guess we would do our executive sessions up there, and the librarian would have to go off and search for the key to unlock the door. Now, if this system were in place, they could just use the key, their electronic key they have, and get into any of the doors they need to without having to go running off to find a physical key.
That's correct.
Kelly?
Hi, yeah, I guess I just wonder, was there a precipitating event to bring this now rather than as part of last year or future year budget requests?
You know, I don't have the answer to that, but I can ask and see if we can bring you the answer to that tomorrow.
I'm just curious on the timing.
Okay, is everybody in favor of this? Don't see any problems here.
Vote on it tomorrow.
Okay, thanks on that one, Connie.
Okay, and then the last request, Nan is not able to be here today, but this is not a new program. This is pretrial services, which the county has been doing since, I believe, 2016. And it was already in the 2020 budget, so the dollar amount is not changing, the program is not changing. We're simply changing the fund that it's being managed out of. The program was originally set up within the jail budget, but now is being managed by the Human Services Fund. So this request is simply taking those appropriations, moving them from the jail and the general fund to the Human Services Fund, and then transferring the fund balance that goes along with it.
Okay, any questions on this one?
Okay, and that's all of the requests, and we will bring them back in a resolution for first reading tomorrow, and then second reading is on the 25th, I believe.
Right. Thanks, Connie.
Okay, thank you, Connie.
Thank you.
Next, we have David Pesnichak will give us an update, discussion on preparation for the EOTC meeting on March 19th. And EOTC is the Elected Officials Transportation Committee.
That's right, thank you. So if I can get this up quickly here. Right, it looks like I got the right one here. So this is a preparation meeting for the EOTC meeting coming up on March 19th. And I guess before I get into the items that we need to cover here today, I did want to touch base with you on the upcoming Housing, Transportation, and Job Summit that was scheduled for this Thursday. You should have received an email now formally canceling that event, so that the planning team has been having conversations with other jurisdictions in Garfield County about demands on staff and elected officials, and it's become evident that there's a lot of other demands out there on staff and elected officials with COVID-19. And because the purpose of the event is collaboration, we were concerned about losing a good number of people to the ongoing efforts. And Garfield County Public Health had sent out a notification to try to postpone non-essential meetings. And it was our feeling as though this was an event that could happen 6 months from now just as easily as it could happen this Thursday. So that was the reasoning behind that. We are hoping that it'll kick off here again shortly after the dust settles with COVID-19. But I do have a couple slides. I did meet with the City of Aspen and Tennis Nomass yesterday before this cancellation event notice came out, and did give them some preparation leading up to that. And I'm happy to go through the slides that I prepared for them. I would anticipate that we would probably go through that exercise again when this does get rescheduled. But if you are interested, I'm happy to do that. Okay.
Yeah, as long as you're ready, might as well.
Okay.
Have a look at it quickly.
Oh, I had two
Oh.
no's and one yes
Oh,
there, Steve.
You shook your head yes.
We're going to see it again at another time.
We're gonna see it again.
Yeah, let's,
We'll see this again prior to when we'd be doing the meeting with CDOT.
Exactly.
So let's not do it now.
Because
and-
things may change between now and then.
I
Yeah.
would anticipate that the agenda probably won't be exactly the same. I'm hoping we can maintain the components of it, but we'll have to see how time transposes.
I just want to thank you for all the work that you did to get this geared up and ready to go. You do an amazing job trying to bring all the electeds and interested parties together. So let us know what we can do to help you the next time around to get it
Thank
going
you.
again.
And I apologize for the
That's
last
hey,
minute
it's
cancellation.
nothing that you did.
So the items hoping to cover here today in preparation for the 19th is first reviewing the October 17th EOTC decisions reached, going through the EOTC action items. In this case, it's just the strategic plan, so the bulk, really the entire meeting is slated to be focused on that strategic plan. And then if you have any questions on the updates that are in your packet for information. To go through the decisions reached, and this is something that we do at each of the prep meetings, so that we don't have to do it at the main meeting. To refresh your memory on what was discussed and decided on October 17th, the first one was acceptance of the August 7th, 2019 EOTC retreat report. And if you'll recall, the purpose of going through that exercise was that report was the basis for the creation of the strategic plan. So we did get acceptance of that report, and then we also went through next steps following the retreat based on feedback that we received at that time. And those four main items were the development of the strategic plan, update of the Comprehensive Valley Transportation Plan, update of the EOTC 1993 IGA, and the development of the new budget framework. So those were all then encapsulated in the last bullet here, the acceptance of the 2020 work plan and meeting dates. So that's was also accepted on October 17th, and that's the schedule that we're currently working through with the March meeting focused on strategic planning. Some other, or I guess the main topic at the October 17th meeting was adoption of the quote-unquote transition budget for 2020. And some of the components of that budget, to refresh your memory again, is to continue the data gathering from the changes in sales and use tax collections, working with RAFTA to potentially assume the no fare service between Aspen Snowmass and Woody Creek, as well as continuing to fund the X Games bus subsidy, the WeCycle operational support for just the years 2020, and also funding phase 1 of the Community Task Force on Transportation Mobility Integrated Mobility System Study. So these, I have been continuing to monitor with the help of Connie Baker in the Finance Department, the changes in sales and use tax collections. There's an update on that in your packet. And have also been working with RAFTA staff to look at the possibility of transferring the no fare service over to RAFTA. But ultimately that decision will be up to the RAFTA board as to whether they'll accept that as part of their 2021 budget. So that is still ongoing.
So on the X Games, is that in hindsight, since X Games has already occurred, or is it for 2021 X Games?
No, this is just 2020. So at this point, X Games has occurred. They've invoiced EOTC and we've paid them.
Okay.
Yeah, so that
We'll
is,
have to
that's done at this
rediscuss again for 2021 X Games.
We will need to rediscuss, yeah. So they're not approved out into the future past this year. But I did want to see if there was any corrections, edits, comments on these before they became official decisions.
I think we're good.
Okay. So I'd like to give you a little bit of overview on the strategic plan and the conversations that'll be coming up on the 19th. Basically setting the table for you as you review that plan and what we'll be looking for in those conversations. But basically, the strategic plan is a high-level guiding document. It's intended to inform decision-making and governance, work planning, EOTC IGA update, as well as budgeting. And then this sort of upside-down triangle funnel is my way of trying to represent where we are and how everything fits together moving forward. So I've got the where we are here in March 2020. That's pointing to the strategic plan development. And then there's the arrows coming down. So the strategic plan then informs the Comprehensive Valley Transportation Plan update, and which those two then inform the IGA update, which are intended to inform the budget framework development. So they all build on one another is the intent. And on the right side, I've added here just some basic questions to try to encapsulate what we're trying to answer with each of these. And the strategic plan is really trying to answer who are we. So taking all the conversations that happened at the retreat and where we are now, developing the mission statement, vision statement, guiding principles, and key strategies that identify who the EOTC is, where it wants to go, and how it intends to get there. But that, again, that's at high level. So the Comprehensive Valley Transportation Plan knocks that down one level and takes the strategic plan as a sort of filter, if you will, and identifies what those infrastructure and operational priorities are actually within the geographic purview of the EOTC. And then moving forward into the IGA development, if you recall the IGA for the EOTC, it has the Comprehensive Valley Transportation Plan attached to it. So assuming that we can get to the point where we have an accepted strategic plan and updated CVTP, that CVTP would be attached to the IGA. And this is a point where I think we can have a discussion about whether we're really structured in a way that makes sense for the EOTC. So once we've had the conversation about where we are, where we want to go, does the structure make sense? And it may come out of that, yes, the structure we have works for where we want to go. It may mean that we need some minor tweaks or something larger. And that's the point where we would need to have those conversations, because your basic structure is outlined within that IGA. And then the budget framework is anticipated to be more of an ongoing working document for the EOTC to guide annual appropriations of funds. So that's really what we're all working toward here. And then the time frame with that at summer or fall 2021 is coordinated with the point where Snowmass would be withdrawing their funds for their transit center, and that's under the current budgeting cycle.
So Dave, while you have that up there, under the, do we do an IGA every year?
We don't. The IGA was last done when the OTC was created in 1993, and that's still standing.
Yeah, and so under the, how we organized, one of the decisions we made out of the, our retreat was to look at the governance model, how decisions are being made.
Right.
Which is maybe a little bit different than in terms of looking at the sort of that broader picture of the IGA. So that's a critical component in terms of how decisions are being made, because in the past, as we've known, any one entity could kill a project, regardless of the needs and wants of the greater community. So that seems to be sort of a threshold question in terms of how and when we'll have that discussion.
And right now, that is slated for next spring. So I think that this is all building up to that and being able to have that conversation. Again, it's difficult to really say, yes, we should change. Maybe all jurisdictions should have that veto power. But again, I think we need to first have the conversations on who the EOTC is and where we want to go, and what are our priorities before we can really identify what that structure should look like, because that veto power is outlined within the IGA. Mm-hmm. So this is all building up to that point.
Yeah. I mean, are we anticipating another retreat in 2020?
In 2020, the Comprehensive Valley Transportation Plan update would be another retreat. I'm hoping it's not a full day, but based on the outcomes and whether we can get through the strategic plan and get that in place as a basic filter to have those conversations with a Comprehensive Valley Transportation Plan, that is, I guess, the series of events that we're working up to. So you have an EOTC meeting scheduled for April 30th. At that meeting, I'm hoping to have a conversation about scheduling that next retreat, because at that point we will know where we are with the strategic plan.
Yeah. It just seems that as part of that conversation, we should be having this conversation sooner than later in terms of the governance model. I mean, that's my thought, but especially as you're going into a budget for 2021, and there may be projects online, and again, if you don't have a means that equates across all three entities and the community as a whole, it could be a stumbling block.
We could bump up that. It would require a second, because I do believe that we need to talk about strategic planning before we can have that conversation. And we also need to talk about the Comprehensive Valley Transportation Plan. So I think that in order to have that, we would need to bump up another retreat into 2020. So basically moving what we have in spring 2021 up to be prior to October in 2020. So the way, I guess, and let me know if this isn't in line with the way you're thinking, is that the strategic plan is the first step in having that conversation. So we are having that conversation and laying that groundwork so that we can base it on really where the EOTC is at as a whole, as opposed to, I guess, I don't want to say tit for tat, but I think that it could end up in those sort of conversations if we don't have that backup, if that makes sense.
Kelly?
Yeah, I guess I would just ask George, would you suggest switching the order of, looking at the IGA and governance first before the Comprehensive Valley Transit Plan? I'm sensitive to what David just said about if the tit for tat is a result of whatever governance decisions we make about putting together the comprehensive plan, that could be cumbersome, but I just want to.
So putting organization
understand.
before priorities.
Right.
I think we should discuss that at the EOTC meeting on the 19th, because I think that's worth a discussion.
I'd certainly love to hear suggestions from the experts on, so we can start contemplating this.
Yeah.
It makes sense. I appreciate what everybody has said.
Well, I
here.
think we've seen, before we can set priorities, I think we've seen in the past how one jurisdiction vetoes and everything's thrown out the window. And I think that's a fear, that how are we going to set priorities when we may not be in agreement and total alignment, and so something that's important to the greater good might be thrown out the window because somebody has a project they think is better for their jurisdiction versus the cumulative effect.
There's something I would add there is that the IGA and that veto power is only associated with budgeting. So it's only associated when, so say in October when we go through budget time, each jurisdiction has to approve a resolution, or it has to be included within the county budget. So each of those are veto powers. With the Comprehensive Valley Transportation Plan, doesn't necessarily have that. It's not a budgeting document. So, and if you recall, I didn't include a copy of the CVTP up here, but it's just the one-page document. So it's not getting into excruciating detail. It's intended to say, we need higher levels of bus service or transit service in this area. We want to concentrate on transit on this corridor, or shifting from this other corridor. So it's not getting into the level of we need a sidewalk here and we need to build a bus depot there, but really broader priorities, yeah.
Yeah, and I understand that, but as you said, the veto power comes in at budget time, and so as we're looking at the 2021 budget and perhaps looking at potential capital projects, we may not be able to move things forward without having that discussion in terms of how decisions are being made.
So that kind of takes me to what I wanted to talk about on this slide, is that the strategic plan itself is a living document. So it's not intended to be perfect right off the bat. It also, going down this path, allows us to more or less take the strategic plan for a test drive, if you will. So if we can get to agreement on vision, guiding principles, and key strategies, those can act as a filter going into the Comprehensive Valley Transportation Plan update, as well as the budget cycle. So we might not have gotten to the conversation yet of do we need to reorganize the EOTC, but we have the full EOTC in the room while we're test driving that strategic plan and those key strategies and guiding principles as we're applying them to the budget cycle. So the way I envision this playing out is if we can get an agreed upon strategic plan, that then gives us more or less something that we can turn into a matrix, kind of a temporary matrix that we can play with to try to rank these projects going into the Comprehensive Valley Transportation Plan and into the budget cycle. Because we then have something to plug into that matrix. At the end of that, if we make it through updating the comprehensive plan and the budget cycle, and we say, this matrix, there's something in here that just isn't working, it stems back to the strategic plan, we then have the opportunity to go back and say, what can we tweak on the comprehensive plan? And is this something that can help us in organizing the EOTC at that point before we get into really doing a hard document like an IGA that is more or less difficult to amend. So I see this as ramping up to that conversation. The EOTC does have quite a bit of flexibility in terms of the decision-making ability. So this is something that we can move into decision-making, start shaping decision-making fairly quickly after adoption of the strategic plan. The pieces that are in the IGA that I think that we can start talking about then is, what is the makeup of the EOTC? Does it need to be seated with all 15 members? Does each of the jurisdictions, they need to sign off by resolution? I think those are the two main components within the IGA. But outside that, we have quite a bit of wiggle room and ability to experiment over the next year in order to get to that point and make sure that we have an IGA that's set in stone that we want. So again, that's been my thought process. We can certainly discuss it on the 19th if we want to adjust the work plan in order to accommodate an earlier discussion specifically on the IGA.
Okay. So I think sounds like we'll probably be having this discussion further at the EOTC meeting, and
okay.
This gives us a good basis on looking ahead, and
Right.
we can be thinking about these different decisions we'll have to make then.
Right. So that was just to touch on that living document piece, that this is intended to be not set in stone in the same way that the IGA is set in stone. You're not establishing a formal governing document that's signed off by each of the entities. It's an accepted or adopted document that can be amended as necessary. But I did want to touch as well on this last part. So we've got the 6 sections, it's broken out into 6 sections. This strategic plan was based on the RAFTA strategic plan as well as the Denver Mobility Action Report, I think it's called. So bringing those together, because the EOTC is a very unique organization or committee, there's not another one out there like a city or a county that is more or less generally known. So this has a fairly in-depth introduction, background, what is this committee section. And a lot of that should be familiar to you coming from the retreat. And then the strengths, opportunities, and challenges, that is verbatim from the report to memorialize that conversation. But moving into the conversation on the 19th, I'd like to spend the bulk of the time on mission, vision, guiding principles, and key strategies, because I think this section hits on really what George is talking about in terms of trying to guide that governance structure. And getting acceptance of those basic principles and tweaking them, I think should be the goal of that meeting.
I was just saying, I'd just love to see a big question mark, a why in there, because I think you've just identified EOTC as very unique, and the why keeps coming back to me. We've made it cumbersome. Is that necessary? As far as I'll go with it today, but I'm just thinking, gee, it's not a streamlined organization. You've brought a lot of organization and clarity, I think, which is great, and that may be enough, but I'd love the why to be part of the conversation.
I think a lot of that too goes back to what's been called swim lanes for the EOTC. So what are your statutory and ballot requirements for
Okay.
operation.
That could be the answer
So-
right there.
Well, yeah,
That'll
because a
help.
lot of it was
Extract
stipulated in the
transit.
voter language, so it was in
Right.
the ballot language as to how we operate and how we got to be the 3 jurisdictional organization. So that was the premise of how we became.
I
But-
think that the concern I have is that why does every elected official have to be in the room when a delegation could go, and as usually happens, RAFTA sends, one and an alternate to a meeting, for
Well, it's
instance.
set up as the 15 members.
Is that statutory? It has to
I don't
be?
That's in the IGA.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it not in the voter language? Is it
It
that
says that
specific?
it's more vague. It says that the 3 jurisdictions have to, I think the language is agree or something like that. But it doesn't necessarily say that all elected officials
Have to
have
be
to
at the
be in the
meeting.
room.
Well, that might be something to discuss.
Yes, and that's I see that those sort of technical details coming in at the point of IGA conversation, and
Okay, great.
working up to that point. But I did want to put this up on the screen
See, Kelly
as a
has a
visual.
question too.
Sorry, I just
Oh,
want to
sorry.
note and comment, following Greg's thread. I still I will be thinking
You say
about
thread
how
or
does
thread?
this
Thread.
Thread, thank you. I didn't mean that as a thread.
I'll still be thinking of this in terms of how are we how is EOTC distinguished from RAFTA? Do those, differences continue to be meaningful? Where are there overlapping goals, principles here? So that's just something I'm paying attention to when I review all this, because it continues to be a question for me.
Absolutely, I think those are good
Throw that
questions.
out.
Yeah.
Yep.
I did want to put this on the screen. So this is the section 5. So you should see a lot of the conversation that was discussed at the retreat showing up in here. The mission statement, just to let you know, that is the same as it was adopted in 2014. So that is the one piece that the EOTC currently has. The vision, guiding principles, and key strategies these have been reviewed. They were initially drafted by me. They've been reviewed by EOTC staff as well as the managers. So they've been through a number of different iterations at this point, but they're intended to capture the action items as well as the primary principles and the values that were expressed at the retreat. I guess before I move on from the strategic plan, were there any other questions on it?
Still reading. Here's one.
It should be in your
We're
packet.
scanning it, yeah.
Yeah.
We all have a week and a couple of days to
Well,
be
see,
looking at
I
this.
just think one of the key things under the strategies, the communication and intergovernmental engagement, I think we do it at a limited basis with other local jurisdictions or entities and the public. So I think, because a lot of times the public doesn't even know who we are. What is the EOTC? So I think getting that out there, knowing that it's this Upper Valley, because of the tax, how we get funded, I think that is a good point that we've never really touched on in the past many, many, many years. So I'd really like to see that in there as that's something we need to be discussing as far as the strategic plan.
Gotcha.
Okay, go ahead, David.
The last part, I don't want to get into each of these because they're all spelled out in your packet. But these are all updates on ongoing efforts. We can discuss them more on the 19th. But I did want to see if you guys had any questions after reading through it, things that I can clarify as you're moving into
What
it.
is the status on the dynamic message sign? Dynamic could be used in many ways in describing that.
Right now, it has been out to bid for a while now. We actually didn't get any responses for a long time, so we had to extend the bid. It currently closes tomorrow. So I'm hoping that we at least have one response. From what I understand, we have one interested party out of Grand Junction, but whether they actually submit by the deadline, we'll see. So we're still hoping to get this going this spring, but we haven't had a great response. Part of the issue has been the technology, and that the technology really isn't off the shelf to be able to gauge the speed of traffic and the buses when they're side by side. So there's a lot of technology out there to say, yes, traffic is generally moving at this average speed, but it's differentiating between the people on the bus and the people in a vehicle doesn't appear to be off-the-shelf technology. So there's needs to be some creativity has been put into that.
But we're still okay with the location of the sign along Cozy Point.
As far as I know, the location was decided. We've had surveys done of that location. We've also had geotech surveys done. So we've currently gotten to that level in order to send it out to bid.
And we've taken into consideration the 3 new billboard signs that are located on that stretch of Cozy Point and making sure they're not going to interfere. There's 3 Dalwhinnie Clean Colorado advertisements now on that section of road. I want to make sure they're not going to interfere with the sight line, the line of sight for an
There is
important.
one that's of concern that we would need to, if the location is finally approved by CDOT. So the final approval is with CDOT, and that'll be a part of the contractor's responsibility. There is one that could potentially interfere that we
Please
might
let
need to
us
have
know about
conversations
that.
We,
about.
we definitely don't want to block the view of the Dalwhinnie sign with
Yeah.
our message.
With our public
sign.
safety
I'd be
sign.
really aggravated if CDOT turns down our dynamic message sign for public safety.
I would just like to say, can we put out an RFP to make those Dalwhinnie signs dynamic?
As in
Dynamically
firewood.
fly away.
Yeah. Thank you, I just had to bring that up, because it is obviously of concern. I just noticed that
Yeah.
there's 3 of them along that section, that the city was concerned about one dynamic message sign's location. I'm going across the street on that one.
We're continuing to look at that as to whether it would interfere or not.
Okay.
Are there questions about anything else coming up for update, or on the update section?
No, thanks, I like being
And I
well
think
versed.
you work right next to us up in the office, so we can always bring questions to you ahead of time or at any
Yeah,
time.
absolutely.
So,
All right, well, that's all I had.
Great,
Okay.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
thanks.
Thanks, Dave.
Now, Kara left the room.
I'm gonna run into
George,
the
you don't want
restroom.
this. Tony? Why don't you take this? George, he does everything off computer, he doesn't paper.
We tried, the computer broke down yesterday when I tried to email it.
So you
Thank
can recirculate that.
Okay, now, do you get 3-minute public comment tomorrow, just to discuss?
Well, we have a busy day tomorrow. We have a lot of public comment coming forward, so,
Do you really?
well, we're thinking we might.
Okay, which topic? We don't
It's
know
up to
yet.
the
Kara,
public.
you could come on up,
TBD.
Kara. You're next.
All right, thank you.
Uh-huh.
So we, in case everybody didn't get the message, we did shift the agenda around so that Kara can present now and Zach will present later. So Kara will be freed up to go to the
the
airport visiting
last-
committee.
To the last meeting at the airport?
Well, their last one maybe before they meet with us,
No,
they're hoping.
we don't know.
So Kara will be, now I'm on the wrong page here because I didn't shift my papers around. Kara, could you introduce your subject here for us,
I
please?
sure can.
She didn't have anything in the packet, Steve. This is,
Oh, that's
I
right,
d-
yeah.
I didn't have anything. I just handed out a copy of the slides for you guys. So Kara Silbernagel in the manager's office to discuss the prep for the joint meeting with Garfield County. That is March 24th. And so I'm going to give you guys some background in prep for that meeting. And this is also pretty similar to what Garfield County is getting as well today for their prep. So both boards are prepared for it. And so just since it's been a while, reminder, the region that we're looking at is Pitkin County, Garfield County, but we are looking at more the entire watershed, so it's inclusive of parts of inclusive of parts of Gunnison County and parts of Eagle County, so Roaring Fork watershed, Colorado River watershed is what we're looking at. I thought a good place to touch base would be some of the things that have evolved over the past year. Technology is a fun thing we all know to keep up with, and kind of what have been the broadband efforts in the region and what that means for this authority. So as you all are aware, we deployed wireless broadband from Elephant, Williams, and Crown in July, and we've got a lot of lessons learned that have kind of come into this effort as we move forward. I think the other thing some of the commissioners and some of the public may know is that Cedar Networks was acquired by Ting Fiber, and they have a pretty aggressive plan for building out fiber in the population areas within this regional scope, including Carbondale, Willits, and Snowmass Village. What that actually means for fruition is yet to be determined, but those are aggressive plans, and now they have some additional capital that Cedar Networks did not have before to manage that expansion. And then the other is Holy Cross Energy is committed to building fiber from Glenwood to Aspen. Initially, it's just for their own infrastructure, and they are still exploring if they will look at being a broadband provider, but are interested at least in how they could potentially be a middle mile network partner in this whole effort. So that adds to kind of the scope and the changing design that continues to evolve. And then City of Aspen and City of Glenwood Springs are continuing efforts on Project Thor and how that might play into feeding our network. So with all this evolving things that continue to plague the land, or that are in the landscape of broadband, I think the initial question is it still a good idea? And we, at the staff level, we believe yes, because even with all these efforts, the remote, harder to serve areas throughout the region are still going to continue to lack broadband service. We're not going to get fiber to the home in the next 5 years to maybe not, but I think that's a pretty aggressive to hope that any of the above providers could actually be giving fiber to the home to the rural areas of Garfield and Pitkin County. Again, as we've seen and as you guys will see in the cost model, it's really expensive to get to those harder to reach areas, and the private sector is not offering the services. It requires leveraging infrastructure, leveraging revenues, additional grants and additional subsidies, and that's where really kind of bringing these efforts together with Garfield and Pitkin County is really kind of helps us get there.
Can I ask a question? You know, I see Carbondale, Willits, which is part of Basalt and Snowmass Village. We've had discussions with Snowmass Village about this, but, you know, we have this effort from Basalt. How are we discussing it with the town of Basalt as far as this authority?
So as far as it goes with the authority, and this goes also to Eagle County, I think how it plays out with Basalt is also Eagle County and even City of Glenwood Springs, is Garfield County and Pitkin County at the staff, we both agreed we have the DOLA grant and we're bringing the most infrastructure in the towers and the LTE equipment to the table. So let's scope what the authority looks like with just us two parties initially. We have reached out to Ken Fellman, who can help us draft what that IGA would look like and how others could come into the authority and what their roles would be if they're not bringing that infrastructure and investment. So we want to kind of stand up this authority with those that are bringing the most investment, not to say that we don't want others to come in, but kind of.
So we're leaving an avenue. Hopefully we'll create an avenue for them to come in at a later date.
Yep, absolutely. And in the interim, obviously the conversations kind of related to Holy Cross, related to Project Thor, still bringing in all the municipalities as well.
Okay, thank you.
Just a brief reminder, I think this will be important as we think about the authority and kind of the different roles. So as we've discussed, that the tower and the microwave equipment are going to still be the county owned and operates. That the authority would just lease access to the towers or lease bandwidth. So it's just a lease relationship. The LTE equipment is a little tricky, that the DOLA grant is covering the purchase of the LTE equipment, but actually moving forward, the LTE equipment will be owned by the authority. And that the network operator will be responsible for the operations of it. And then the authority will contract directly with the network operator. So really as we stand this up, the authority is going to lease the tower and the microwave, they're going to own the LTE equipment and own the contract. And so it really will be a pretty hands-off from the county's perspective and kind of an independent entity for the authority.
So looking at the ownership with Ting Fiber bought Cedar Networks. How does Mammoth fit in with Cedar Networks? I can't remember the relationship.
So Cedar is predominantly focused on like in-service, so as an internet provider. Mammoth is both a network operator and looks at those when we can buy wholesale. So if in the past we have some relationships with Cedar, and we're still trying to figure out if those relationships will continue. Will Cedar provide wholesale services for bandwidth and backhaul? Or are they only going to become just an internet service provider and not offer that service? It's yet to be determined.
Okay.
So just some more background to get everyone prepared for March 24th of what has been happened. So at the last meeting in August, I believe, of 2019, both boards asked staff to bring back financial models of what does a phase one and basically a full build out look like? What is the different subsidy that would be required to make it sustainable? At the same time, we had just discovered that there was limited microwave spectrum between Lookout and Sunlight Mountain, which actually caused Sunlight to be a single point of failure. We had just begun to explore if a rifle Meet Me Center would help build resiliency. So we were directed to kind of continue to look at how to build resiliency into the network design. So we just submitted that request to DOLA, and it's twofold. One was additional funding for the Rifle Meet Me Center. Garfield County is actually, it's all Garfield County's match, so there's not a change in dollar to Pitkin County. But Pitkin County is doing a reallocation of the initial grant to support the LTE wireless equipment at all the towers. So I'm gonna try and keep this at a high level and not get into design, but I wanted you all to be aware because it does affect how we're reaching out into the unserved areas initially. So what we found, as you all may recall, is that the translator fund borrowed about 1.5 million from the general fund, and part of that was to cover the cost of the towers and to cover the cost of the LTE equipment. We had initially planned that Mammoth Network, the network operator, would purchase that LTE equipment, but because as we started to walk through, we felt that the county was more at risk because if we ever wanted to fire the network operator, we'd lose all that investment. So we decided, I guess this was about in the 2019 budget cycle, that we would purchase the LTE equipment. And as we found, price continued to escalate, and Garfield County actually had requested the purchase of that LTE equipment in their original grant proposal. So as we were looking at the Rifle Meet Me Center, we said, can we reallocate some of the funding to actually focus on the LTE equipment for the primary and secondary towers and push out those relay towers to further future phases, because if we don't have the LTE equipment, we can't get there. So this is just for phase one. This is not all build out, but just so you can see, we've basically pulled back on a relay site for Redstone, Sopris Creek. Old Snowmass is still somewhat might be possible because we have a good relationship with Basalt Fire. And then Lower Red, the translator or telecommunications team, is looking at some different options. And with Forest Service approvals, we just know that's in future years out. So that's why we reallocated those funds. And with that now can actually cover the LTE equipment at all the other sites. So Sunlight, Rudeye, Thomasville, Jackrabbit, and Old Snowmass. So with that, then there's the entire network design for the Broadband Authority that has changed since this last came before you guys. So on the left was the initial design that was presented at the joint meeting, and Sunlight was a single point of failure. So then we looked at phase one, which has Rifle as a Meet Me Center, and what does that look like? So this, and I'm sorry, there's actually an error in this. Thomasville should not be included in phase one right now. I'll show you how it's phased out or phased into the next version. But so this is basically, we looked at what would phase one be and what's the sustainability of that, because that's all committed in DOLA grant dollars. And then what would future investments be? And so then we looked at, again, apologize, very busy trying to keep this as simple as possible. Phase two, and that's where Thomasville is added in, and that's planned for 2021 right now. And then phase three is kind of full build out as we imagine. And what I've circled in red is the Pitkin County investment. You can see there's a lot more future phases for Garfield County as this authority evolves. And that's really just because, you know, Pitkin County was 3 years ahead of Garfield County when we joined together. And I apologize, I made this presentation in haste and the titles are wrong. The title on the right should be full build out. So it's not phase one with, right, that's full build out, that's what the design would look like.
And that's 2021?
Depending on future grant, but it'd be 2021, 2022, I think is what we have it to.
George?
So Kara, as you noted, we only have a few new sites being rebuilt because we've done a lot of work already. But Garfield County has substantially more. So are they budgeting within a 3-year or 5-year cycle, or how are they looking in terms of their connectivity as well?
Yeah, so essentially how Garfield County has budgeted is what you see up on the right, so the Broadband Authority with the Rifle Meet Me Center, that's all committed through DOLA dollars to date. If we go to what's on the right now, but is titled incorrectly, the full build out is, as I understand, the Broadband Authority wireless revenues, as well as Garfield County has budgeted, I can confirm this, I think it's $250,000 each year for the next few years to support grant matching dollars. So the concept is that the Broadband Authority with the wireless revenues would now have grant matching dollars, and that there might be additional county support and grant matching dollars, but any of that build out would come from grants. So it would be kind of a mix, and we don't know what that actual mix of what would be county versus Broadband Authority, but Garfield County is budgeting and knows that there'll be future grant match requirements to support the build out.
So with the proposed Broadband Authority, what sort of roles, responsibilities, financial implications for Pitkin County in terms of future sites for Western Garfield County?
As we've built it out right now, it would be, again, most of the revenues would hopefully cover those matches, and that then it's mostly how the sites are built out, I'm using too many words, how the sites are, then the match comes from that respective county. So if we wanted more relay towers and would ask for relay towers, the match would come from Pitkin County for all that match. For all the other towers and build out, that is to Garfield County.
All right, and then at some point, if we can get Eagle County involved, then they can help within the Mid-Valley area.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, when you say full build out, you added back in Red Mountain, you didn't add back in Redstone or the Cypress Creek ones.
And that's mostly because this was made in haste and we're still trying to figure it out. But yes, that it would be Red Mountain and other tertiary relay towers.
As we go forward, the full build out, that's a continuing process of, we figure out there's an area that doesn't get service. If we put a tertiary tower in a certain location, it would cover an area. So that ultimately, full build out might be a continuing process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I think it kind of depends as we start to roll out with phase one, where are the opportunities to place towers, what do those relay towers look like? But just from, I think what we've even seen with our telecommunications folks is that we just need, before we can commit to relay towers, we need to get the primary and secondary up and running.
Mm-hmm. Kelly?
Thank you. Are these schematics reflective of the growing subscriber base? So, you know, the the match assumptions based on some calculation of the number of subscribers that are being pulled in as those phases
Yeah.
come online?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so each site has a different assumption of the subscriber base. So, for example, I think Thomasville, we've got an 80 of all the households it will see, we assume 80% because there's no service there. Sunlight, we assume 6% of all the households it sees, and so it's built in, and that's how the future years are built out and when it can start to repay.
Okay, thank you.
So what you will see at the joint meeting is kind of a comparison of the phase 1 and full build out and that evaluations. What you'll see is in both models, we're still refining the full numbers, but there's operating losses in the first 3 years, regardless. What we found is in phase 1, if you only commit to phase 1, there's really a minimal cash flow over a 10-year period, and so just because you're not growing the subscriber base, so it's not viable. If you do the full build out, there does kind of seem to be a tipping point around especially year 4 and 5, where the revenues start to catch up, and even to the point of being able to then have cash reserves in hand. And with that, we still even modeled based on the experiences learned from Elephant, Crown, and Williams. We actually took an even more conservative approach in those wireless revenues, and still feel a level of confidence now in the 10-year plan. So the recommendation is going to be a full build out, but it's going to require, because essentially there's a cash flow issue, $125,000 subsidy from each county at the startup, with the idea that the cash flow by year 5 could repay that subsidy. In addition, the fiscal agent, after talking to both finance departments, I think both staff on both sides feel that if we made the fiscal agent any one department, we might be paying for more staff time because we'd be burning out. And so is agreement that we will try and outsource to a third party, which actually helps ensure autonomy for the authority and keep that hands-off distance that I think was some concerns that we heard last time when the two boards met. As well as what we're looking at will be, it appears that we can even get the site leases can begin in year 5, so that the telecommunication fund will actually even start to see a revenue on top of the subsidy payback for the tower sites.
Steve?
Okay, Greg, and then Kelly.
My concerns are, one, the build out and the payback is going to be on, the assumptions would include that there's no competition for the service. If somebody else pops up and offers a similar service, that could slow us down and pay back.
That's actually why we even went with more conservative numbers, because we've actually seen that from the 3 sites.
That.
Yeah, so we feel obviously the wireless revenues is the biggest assumption and risk, but we feel like the 3 sites we have, there's already competition, and we're starting to see how that's playing out. So.
Got it. Okay. Because also the other thing, I know we've talked about this before, there's an ambitious effort to launch satellites to provide 1 gigabit broadband ubiquitously, at similar cost to what the fiber and cable companies are charging. And they've predicted they could be ready by 2020 or even 2021 to start providing a service. So we might be seeing competition from space. And so I just want to, I'd love it if you could include something about what else is out there on the horizon when we make this presentation to the boards, because the game could change, while we're making these decisions. And I know you're on top of it, and we've talked about it, but I think that should be part of the conversation going forward, just so nobody's taken by surprise when Elon Musk tweets that the thing is up and rolling, and we're, so.
No, absolutely, and I think that's been a conversation even with the Holy Cross of what is the future investment. I think right now we can assume future investment is all phase build out, right? But maybe future investment is there still is a capital investment and a grant application, and maybe it looks different than the design that we have now. Maybe it's working with satellite companies that still need some connection down terrestrially to get to the hard to reach. We don't know, but we know that there's, to still reach those hard to reach areas, there's probably still going to be a gap, that there's going to be a role for the authority and some capital investments coming forward.
They'll leave the expensive part to us, I think.
Yeah.
And then I just wondered, will there be a detailed pro forma with our packet
Yeah.
before
Yeah.
Governor County meeting? Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
I have a logistical question. So this is gonna take 2 hours. So what are we discussing at this joint meeting, other than this? I mean, I don't see us having, I think this needs that amount of time because it's so complex and there's so many issues. If we're gonna try and get to these agreements at the end of the day, we're gonna have to have some really.
And that was a point that was discussed at the staff level, and why we'll have a packet out early next week for both boards with a full pro forma. And you know, we can spend as much or as little time on the pro forma and stop there and transition to others, or if there's, the hope is that can we get through the first 3 phases and then get to just kind of what is some of the governance.
No, I'm talking about the other items. When we looked at what we were gonna discuss at this joint meeting, we had a list this long. I'm talking about items other than this. I think this is an opportunity for us to talk in depth about this issue. I'm just looking at Phyllis. What about our list that we came up with is that we've.
It was City of Aspen, wasn't it, the really long
No,
list?
we had a list that was going with Garfield County too.
There was about 5 items on that list, including this was
Yeah.
one of those 5. The Garfield County Commissioners want to discuss this.
And
So
leave the
that's-
other items. Okay, that's the clarification I needed. I think this is gonna take us 2 hours of in-depth discussion, and the other things we'll just have to wait until another meeting at some other
I
time.
mean, one of the items was thanking them and finding out what we do, how we work together and what we're working together on. So if we have 5 minutes at the end,
That's
that
an
would be
easy
a
one,
great
but
thing to
talking to
have.
housing and transportation and childcare and, yeah, that's a whole nother meeting in itself. So we wanna dedicate ourselves to you on that day.
The beauty is if we get through the cost model and governance discussion, there could potentially be another joint meeting between now and September, and hopefully it's a simple signing of an IGA, and then you guys can talk about all the other things.
Okay.
Right? So yeah, here's kind of a rough outline of the meeting that we've talked about. There's going to be a couple key decision points of do we move forward or not. And just as you guys can see, our timeline that we're trying to work towards is, it seems, most of the construction and installation on the towers for phase 1. Realistically, we're probably saying September is when everything of phase 1 would be live. And so in order to get there, in a perfect world, it'd be nice to have the authority stood up, because then we know how the revenues are coming in. We can have the network operator agreement. So that's what we're working towards right now, and we can shift as need be.
Great.
Any other questions or items missing?
Okay. I think we're good, Kara. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have fun at your next meeting.
I have a question. Sorry, Kara, I just have a question. I know this is a big part of what you're working on. Do you feel like this is moving along as efficiently as we can move it along? Is there anything else that we can be helpful on that front?
I think it has been hard to do a pro forma because there's been so many changing dynamics related to technology, lesson learned, site visit, all that. I think now that we've got a pro forma that is a stake in the ground and we can adjust from there, I think things will start to move along a lot quicker.
Thank you.
And we're almost through all the site builds at Pick and County.
Yeah, sure.
Until technology changes. Again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Speaking of that's the last thing on the satellites, the next satellite launch of 60 satellites is on next Saturday morning, 7:36 a.m. So if you see a train of satellites flying over, people have been noticing these things as they deploy.
So when
You
does
saw them,
space
right?
get full, or everything starts falling down literally around our ears?
It's already happening.
Yeah. I'll let you guys solve that one next.
That's up to Greg, because I'm not
Saturday
going.
morning. We'll see it Saturday night.
And they're shooting him up with electric planes.
They will get a virus of some type at some time, and then.
Can we go to a future agenda since we
Yes,
have time?
I was gonna say, we're scheduled for a break at 3 o'clock, so let's go ahead and do future agendas.
Okay, I have 3 items. Your doodle poll on the airport resulted in April 16th, a Thursday, when everyone was available.
Mike?
Got it.
Do we have a time or tentative?
They're looking in the afternoon. They were thinking, I think 4 to 7. So people could attend. I believe it'll appear on your future agendas. Right now, we're looking at the Meadows as a first choice. We don't have an answer back from them yet. So afternoon, early evening would be the window that they're looking at. The Limelight What's Meaningful Action program, Greg has commented that you're attending, so if anyone else is attending, if there's 3, let us know. So
What's the
Charlotte
date on that
can,
one? Yep, you have the date in front of you.
She does not.
She
give me
has
the
it,
date.
yeah, it's sometime soon.
So Greg right now is the only one who responded to Charlotte.
That's easy enough then.
So then that's just where it'll be. River District, giving an update on April 7th, that response she got from Andy Mueller and Zane Kessler.
It's a regular meeting, or work session day?
Colorado River District update.
That's on our regular work session.
Yeah, April 7th.
April 2nd, that was?
7.
7th, okay.
And those are the 3 items I have for future agendas.
So they want to come to our work session on April 7th?
Correct.
Okay.
That'll be scheduled.
Okay. I guess I would just, I reiterate my request for a broader watershed work session. We don't have to dedicate our whole work session to it, but work session time on a broader watershed conversation with our partners such as RWAPA and Roaring Fork Conservancy, the River District.
Do you want them all in the room at the same time?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure my message is getting through because we've seen like a half hour slotted for the attorney's office to do an update on the watershed. And I'm not seeing any time scheduled for the partner presentations on things like the updates to the watershed master plan, the Crystal River watershed master plan, the basin implementation plan. Like those are very specific topics that would be aligned for a presentation at the same time. Whether the River District and their efforts as part of the basin implementation plan plays into that.
So you're looking at multiple hours on the same day with all the partners in the room, which is a big thing to schedule, which I think we need to contact to get the partners available.
Again,
So
I'm
if-
just continuing to reiterate that request that I've made since the beginning of the year, and like we've seen on a future agenda like a half hour from the attorney's office to come and give us a watershed update. And now this request of a separate watershed update, like if there's a specific topic that merits standalone time, that's fine, and that may be related to the River District's request. But
I'm just asking you what it is you're looking for. You're looking for like a half a day, because we couldn't do it in an hour. So like a half a day of getting all these groups in the room at the same time to present their.
And part of it is because they're all working on these things together.
Right, right.
So there is some
Wait, but
efficiency there. In
That's
bringing
what you're
them
asking us
together.
for. So that is scheduling kind of above and beyond. So we don't want Zane to come here if he's going to give us what he would give us if we were all in the same room together. You're
Right,
wasting-
asking, does the rest of the board want to have that kind of time committed to this?
I think we could look at perhaps the Roaring Fork cooperative that put together the initial Roaring Fork watershed, and that's pretty much staff, and that may cover a lot of the topics and issues I think that you're looking for, Kelly, at least at a starting point. I share Patty's concern. I mean, it's sounding like a sort of a semi-retreat in terms of bringing all these entities together. But I think the cooperative could probably address at least the larger picture with an
Watershed
update.
Collaborative.
And I think the River District is, they're going to be looking, I suspect, a little different discussion in terms of a proposed tax initiative that they have, and what they're thinking about in terms of augmentation up the Crystal. So they might be a little more specific than.
Sure. And again, that's unclear from
Right.
Yeah, I don't-
what we've
it's not
just
clear to me.
heard. So, you know, I'm sorry this has clearly been unclear over the last 6 months, but, you know, we give a lot of money to these organizations who work on these plans that we don't then hear about,
Right.
yet should be informing, for example, how we're working at the round table, et cetera. You know, so there's updating processes that are happening right now that, you know, I would find to be particularly informative for us, given that we do fund them, that there's new information, that they're all collaborating on these things together. So I don't want to have like Rawaba come present on something that's going to overlap with the Conservancy, that's going to overlap with the Crystal River watershed effort, that's going to overlap with, you know, to me, there's efficiency in trying to have them
It
come
sounds like a
together.
multiple-hour session that.
Oh, I mean, this is a chunk of time. for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, so that to me is more like a water retreat that needs to be scheduled outside of just a work session day. So Kelly, I would recommend that you meet with John Ely and John Peacock and see what organizations you would like to have attend, and then how we can get it together. I think it's much different than, and then if Zane wants to come and speak to us on something different, or maybe not, we don't want him to be duplicating his time either.
Right.
So I think that is something, and if we can organize that and do it, that's something we've never done, and maybe.
Well, and
that's
I'm perfectly fine to do that, and I just didn't know if there's willingness
well,
on this board to do time outside of a Tuesday, or if it's better to just
Well, I think
chunk out
if
some
we're
work session.
gonna do it the way you wanna do it, will have to be something special.
I know, I've requested that April Long at some point get on the agenda for, because she's been working in all these plans with Roaring Fork Conservancy, and I've asked her to talk to staff about getting on the agenda, and I haven't asked her lately, so I don't know, there may actually be a plan I just don't know about. But I would say, sure, that maybe we can get a couple people in the room and satisfy your initial.
Well, and excuse my
concerns.
frustration, I mean, I initially, you know, reached out to John Peacock on this back in September and thought that the first quarter was a good time of the year, knowing that we have more time in the first quarter of the year.
Right, before we get busy.
So that
yeah.
is, you know, weekly going away. Anyway, so we'll get it done. It's not super urgent. I mean, there is some urgency with regards to like our roundtable work, but I appreciate your support.
So I see it as a Roaring Fork Valley Water Summit. That would be maybe even a half a day that we would, all these different groups would hopefully participate. And there could be they could all do presentations to all the other groups in one setting about what they're working on. I mean, they potentially could do that, but there could be a synergy from having the water minds from all the different organizations all working on one or two topics at the
Sure.
same meeting.
Right.
That's even bigger than what Kelly's
So,
asking for.
yeah.
So we need,
Let's
yeah,
keep
we
it-
need to
I'll
figure
try
out
to
where
flesh
we're gonna
some of
land
out,
on this.
you know.
When
I'm
we-
thinking like a 2 hour, you know.
A 2 hour.
And,
Now, maybe it could
Maybe it
be,
needs to be bigger, but I'll get with John and the attorney.
and
Yeah,
maybe it
figure
could
out
be
what
the
the-
Roaring Fork Water Collaborative that would be the one to organize it and invite the different
That's a whole
groups.
different thing than what Kelly's asking for. So I think we need to focus on what Kelly has been asking for quite some time and see if we can get it done.
George.
Okay. Back to the River District. Can we put some things on the agenda so I know what's on their agenda as well? So I think we should consider putting on the agenda for discussion their proposed ballot initiative, where the status is of that, which probably ties into a governance model, and as well as their plans for augmentation up the Crystal River Valley. And there may be some other, but at least.
That's if Zane's meeting is actually held, or if it's not, becomes part of this other meeting.
Yeah, this is for the.
No, just for
This is
Zane, when Zane comes.
Yeah,
and-
well, I'm
This is
saying
when we
is,
first
but if
started.
we're gonna have Zane come back, if the thinking was to have Zane come in as part of Kelly's request, let's just figure it out so we're not being redundant and we're getting the right people in the right room at the right time.
Yeah.
But I think
It
George's
seems
issues
like
are
this-
pertinent, it might be.
Yeah, I'm just talking about the upcoming future.
I know, but
agenda.
I'm saying
Yeah, I
that if
understand.
you may not decide to have Zane's meeting special, it may be rolled into this broader discussion.
No, I think we're gonna have a meeting with Zane. It's totally separate from Kelly's request for a more broader discussion. And Zane has very specific
whatever.
things regarding the river district that George is referring to.
Right, above and beyond, but
Yeah.
still, then he'll be coming back for the other one, because he's
Well,
still gonna
that's
be.
all right, the
Maybe,
more,
maybe not.
it's okay if we meet with him more than once.
Well, I'll start with what's the agenda, so we
Yeah,
get
right.
a snapshot of what that
Right,
is.
yeah.
April Cleveland on that too, if you might be interested in just attending that.
And April's with, help me?
Steve Aspen, engineer,
Oh.
Rawapa, she's the director of Rawapa.
Okay. Yep.
Can we go to other agenda items?
I don't have any others.
I have some
Patty,
confusion.
you always have something.
Well, it's because I read it very carefully, but I have an issue with, our regular meeting on the 25th, we have the Energy Code second hearing. No, it says continued from March 11th meeting, which is tomorrow, but it's not on tomorrow's agenda. So
Talking
do
about
we
the
need
easement?
to add it tomorrow to continue it to the 25th?
I believe so.
Or are we okay? We need to clarify that so we don't mess that up.
Yep.
And that actually is the only other one. And then hopefully, before we meet with SALT, we'll figure out, which is not till the 24th, we can figure out before then how we're gonna get there and how we're gonna get back, because we have a new plan. It just says we're returning, it doesn't say we're getting
When's
there.
we have a joint meeting with Basalt?
We have a joint meeting in Basalt with Garfield
Oh, in
County.
Basalt, yeah, not with Basalt, okay.
And since we're discussing broadband, there's a member of the Basalt Town Council who might wanna be there to hear what we have to say about our regional effort on broadband.
Well, it's open to the public.
Yeah. That's all that I have on future agendas.
Okay, any other future agenda items?
Nope.
Okay, looking at the agenda, maybe we should take our break now, just 5 minutes before 3. And 3:15, or maybe we should try to be back in at 3:10 because John Wilkinson probably will show up a few minutes early.
Sure. Great, all right.
So let's do, Kelly,
No, okay, let's
let's
take
do
a
a
break.
15-minute break.
Thank you. Apologies again.
Did you go through Ely too? So there's that wrestling point of who does what.
Right. I've had the conversation with John and Laura about what I.
I haven't been in all those requests, but I've made my own.
Yeah.
I'm Tom Wilkinson, by the way. I don't think we've ever met. Yeah, Kelly, nice to meet you. And Greg. Air food bump. I missed you at Doug Throm's party. Okay. Or 2 doors up from.
Did he list his resume by ride?
Yeah. What's been fun is sort of taking college and music.
Yeah, she's gonna, I'm gonna let her, just know what she accomplished in the 2017 one, but that much less talk. Of course, they're not really doing it now, it's like to drop it.
Steve. I know, there's some thinking, what if I had to self-quarantine and stay out at least 6 feet from the fence? What were they saying, 3 feet is what they were saying in group settings. Well, I heard they're postponing, Coachella, which is a big deal. My son. Got on my bike for the first time this year on Friday on Monday. Once I get on my bike, I start to even though skiing is still okay. I almost got my bike out today, and it was kind of snowing on our house. Yeah, but I might end up driving home and it's still carrying the bike. Yeah, well, I do sort of often have my bike, not my bike. I'm thinking of getting a couple of things recently. Just go to places that you wouldn't want to ride to and get right back. It's kind of on my short list. Really appropriate.
Next on our agenda today, we have a citizen board interview, and this will be John Wilkinson, who has applied to be on the Open Space and Trails Board. So John, if you can come up to any of the mics there, make sure the little red light is on.
Looks like it is, yep.
Okay. So, thank you for applying to
Yeah.
this board. We really rely a lot on the citizens on the different boards are so important to us and give us good advice from all different sides. So, tell us, why are you interested in being on the Open Space and Trails Board?
Well, I've always had an interest in it, and if you had seen my resume, I've been involved with open space and trails committees over my history being in Picken County. And it's always been one of my dreams to be on the Open Space Board, and Tim McFlynn was our representative since it began. And so when his opening came up 2 years ago, I wasn't in a position at that time because of my schedule and other commitments I had to apply to the board at that time. But now I've reached that point where I have time that I can allocate for it. And I do want to get back into it because I enjoyed that part of my public service when I was in Snowmass Village. You know, one of the cornerstones of being involved with the county was the whole Sky Mountain Park. And putting that all together, you know, when Dale Will called us up when I was on council in Snowmass Village, and Dale said, would you be interested in partnering with the county and the city of Aspen to acquire the Sky Mountain Park area, which was then called Drosty. We put together a coalition, went to the voters in Snowmass Village, which is outside of the jurisdiction of the Sky Mountain Park, and got our local community to support a $2 million bond issue to help pay for purchasing of the property. And it was just so exciting to see that happen, because if you remember, the original idea was Drosty had gotten, I forgot how many home sites he got approval for up there. It was like over 100. I think it was something like that. And then the county got him down to 9, I believe. And then to be able to step in and purchase that property to save it for so many different reasons. I mean, just being part of that whole committee on developing it as far as preserving the open space, the wildlife closures that went into effect, and then having trails that make sense, that are sustainable. I think that was really a nice part of being part of the community. So.
Questions from the board, George?
Thanks, John, for applying. I just want to piggyback off of two points that you talked about. Open space and trails, they meet during the week, twice a month, and then they also do site visits. So you've got the flexibility to do that?
Yeah, at that point, I'm practicing retirement. I'm not fully retired, but I'm practicing. So my schedule allows for me to maneuver around. I'm on the library board, so that meets at Wednesdays at noon, but once a month. But yeah, I'm ready to jump into this and participate fully.
Okay. And then when you look at, let's say Sky Mountain, for example, but for future open space acquisitions, do you think that all open space acquisitions should provide recreational access versus other attributes for the acquisitions of that possible property?
Well, you know, I really like to read a lot. I like to read all the documentation I can, and I like to ask questions. And so the question that I would ask is this appropriate to have recreation in these open space parcels? You know, if we're going to be spending that kind of money on having the open space parcels, that should be part of the conversation. But does it mean that it has to have trails or anything else in there? I don't think so. I mean, we got plenty of examples around that in the county where there isn't a recreation associated with the open space, but where it's appropriate and where it can be done and where it can be done sustainably, I think, yeah, you have to take a look at it. But where does it have to be everywhere? No.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks.
How you might view sustainably, how might you assess a project, what factors would you look at for determining if it, you know, should be kept as open space or if it should have a public access component to it?
Well, you know, something that I've been thinking about quite a bit lately is the effects of climate change on our trails, and we're dealing with that on the Nordic Council right now. And when we redid our master plan, we did identify places where we might be able to move our Nordic system in order to still have it if we don't have enough snow in the wintertime to have groomed trails down in the lower valleys. And we had identified the top of Aspen Mountain to be one of those places. And at one point, they were grooming Nordic trails up on top of Aspen Mountain. And then Ashcroft is always something that's been in our mind as far as, you know, where could we go to have sustainable trails. But the climate change issue is definitely something that we have to take a look at. And what does that mean? You know, does that mean that the stream flows, like through still water? You know, what does that mean to the wildlife in that particular area? Sky Mountain Park and the Owl Creek Road corridor up to Burnt Mountain. What does that mean? I know you guys looked at that question on the closure of the government trail. So it's a fluid thing. In my mind, it's moving, and is it sustainable? And what is the capacity? And that's another thing I've been really thinking about. How much can we have in our recreational trails, and how much does it affect wildlife and other factors? I mean, we used to kayak Stillwater several times during the summer, but now it's just become so popular, nobody goes there anymore, you know, to paraphrase the old era. But it's just become,
Right.
what is the carrying capacity of Stillwater? What is the carrying capacity of the Rio Grande Trail? I mean, I ride the Rio Grande Trail on a regular basis, and over the years it builds up. It's not overwhelming, but I can see that happening. So how do we anticipate capacity issues on our trails? So did that answer your question, or?
Sort of. I was sort of wondering how you might look at what factors, if you were to, for example, say a capacity question, you know, what would give you an answer to say, yes, we've reached capacity, or this is how we might manage capacity, or, you know, what would you look at to?
You know, I
answer
think
that
we're
question?
pretty lucky to be here in that, you know, when I write up 7-star after work and I see 10 people, I think that might be busy, but that may not be busy. And people that aren't from around here would think that, wow, check these out, you know, these wild trails that we have. So, you know, again, I like to rely on experts in the field. I like to have science-based information in order to make a decision. You know, personally, yeah, it would be nice to be able to everyone have their own private little ride or hike or float on the rivers. But at what point does that reach? Do you have to put in the restrictions? I think that's interesting. It's going to be interesting what happens this year up at Stillwater with the restrictions on parking, and you have to shuttle. Because that's what we did for years. We'd park a car, then I'd ride my bike back to get the car and do that. But it's, you know, what is the capacity? I don't know.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Quick. So I
Abby?
know you checked it out that you can be on appointed to more than one committee or commission. Who appoints you to the Nordic? You represent Snowmat? Who?
No, the Nordic Council is actually an ad hoc, no, it's not ad hoc, it's a separate nonprofit. And we're all members they're voluntary members, and that's what I was a representative of Snowmass Village initially when I
Like
got.
George is our rep, right, George?
Yeah, I think, are you?
Yeah, George is. And
That was a yes answer from George.
George is the Pickens County representative. Then Bill Madsen is our representative from Snowmass Village, and City of Aspen is Ward Hollenstein. And so this is a separate advisory committee that advises to the county because you are the funding agency for that. Then it goes to the City of Aspen that does the actual grooming and maintenance of the trails.
I'm just, you know, I just want to make sure we're not creating any conflict of interest between the Nordic Council and Open Space and Trails Board.
Yeah, no, I mean, originally, and John knows this, originally when the Nordic Council was first put together, it was an IGA, had to be funded by Pickens County, City of Aspen, and Snowmass, and because of that, you had elected officials on it. But since through the Open Space and Trails program funded, it's now, the Nordic Council pretty much operates as an advisory to the city, to the county, to the open space. So there's really not a conflict of interest
I
there.
just want to make sure that you're clear.
Well, in Howie Mallory, who is on both
City
Pickens
and
County
county.
Open Space and City Open Space, is on the Nordic Council as well. I mean, these are driven people. I mean, the people on the Nordic Council are pretty serious about Nordic skiing, so it's fun to be on that board.
Driven? You mean there are electric cross-country skis now?
I'm working on that. I got that e-skis. You take belt sanders and you have batteries and I actually thought of that.
But I appreciate your taking the time, because he called me about it. I said, you know, I appreciate it when people take the time to come in and show their interest in being appointed, and we do. You work hard for the library. We've known that for many years, and now I know you work hard for Nordic, and so I appreciate your coming in, John. It's nice to see you.
Yeah, well, you know, I worried about being on the library board because I'm not going to give that up.
No, I know how you feel about the library.
Yeah, I'm very, very passionate about the library. I was in Denver at a meeting on Friday with the state library, and I'm organizing our trip to Washington, D.C. the first week of May. And the coronavirus may impact us, but our president has zeroed out funding for libraries nationwide, not zero increase, zero amount. So.
Greg, you want to follow up?
Well, it was more of a question. Do we have term limits, Phyllis? Do we have term limits for the Open Space and Trails Board?
I don't think so.
I remember.
No, we don't. We had talked about it, but we
Talked
don't.
about it, but we don't.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
Are there term limits for the library board?
I don't believe so.
No. Oh, okay.
just wanted, some of the things you talked about are really important to me, like, sustainability. We know that there's so much better mobility now. Whether you have new trails or not, the mobility, the access, the ability to get up there for more people is clear. Whether it's getting way back into the backcountry on e-bikes or even the AT skiers, and we just have a lot more people getting out everywhere now. And one of the big concerns I think open space is confronted with is connectivity for wildlife. Like, what about wildlife corridors and wildlife trails? And I know there's some initiatives on that. If you're familiar with the what is it called, the Watershed Biodiversity Project, which is looking at connectivity for wildlife. We're concerned about the riparian areas where, how does open space work with healthy rivers, and what are the river and riparian concerns when we're looking at an open space purchase? There's a lot to it there, and I think you'd probably be a great asset to have in those things. There was something else I wanted to ask you. Maybe we covered it. Oh, here's a dilemma. We've got an aging population. We've got some of the most fit and aggressive bikers in the octogenarian category, probably anywhere on the planet. We've got people here who like to ride.
How old does he
and
say
they're
you are,
on
George?
e-bikes now, and they're riding their e-bikes up into the high country, and they're getting up on places they probably shouldn't be. And I've had several approach me over the years and say, "Hey, you got to do something for us. We couldn't do this without our e-bike." And it presents a dilemma for me because we see an aging demographic. We've got rules that keep electric bikes out of places like Hunter Creek and Smuggler, and I've always supported those. But more and more people are coming to me to say, "Hey, I wouldn't be able to do this otherwise." So you think, well, maybe that's the time to quit, or do we try to accommodate people, who are respectful? They're not causing trouble, but that's a dilemma that's come forward, and I don't have an answer. Just wondering what you think about it.
Well, I know at some point I'm not going to be able to ride up into Hunter Creek, get up to Four Corners. But I'm going to keep doing it on my bike. I'm going to pedal as long as I can. But at some point I know physically I won't be able to do it, and I can accept that. But there should be places that are non-motorized. I mean, that's the whole idea behind wilderness area. Wilderness area, you can't take mechanical devices. So that excludes bikes, which I totally support. I mean, there needs to be places where if you're going to go for a hike, you're not going to be encountering mountain bikes. I think in the same vein that you should be able to ride a bike in a place without having motors coming up in places where they're not approved. If there is a change in the law or a change in the way the easements are overlaid with the legal requirements, because like in Snowmass Village, we have a ton of trails that people want to ride e-bikes on.
Right.
Well, they're specifically prohibited. It says motorized is not allowed. But given that, how many hundreds of miles do we have in Pickens County where you can ride e-bikes?
Exactly.
And I talked to Steve about, I'm thinking about getting one just so my wife and I can get to places that you wouldn't necessarily want to pedal to. But I'm thinking about some rides I'd like to do. Arbany Kittle, ride up Lanedo up to the top there. Go up Little Annie's. I'll never ride up the face of Aspen Mountain ever again. I remember doing that when the mountain bikes first came out. I'd never consider riding up that.
It's easier on an e-bike.
Well, exactly, So
Right.
there are places where you can do it, but there also should be places set aside where you get there under your own power, whether that's on a bike or hike or skis or whatever. But I see that as a big issue coming forward because they are becoming more prevalent. I mean, the Rio Grande Trail, fine. I mean, that's a transit corridor. It used to be a train line. I'm okay with that. But again, there should be places where you can be in a place where you're not going to be encountering motors.
Right, thank you for that, I appreciate that. Last question was just about connectivity from, say, Brush Creek, the intercept lot, to ABC. That's one of my,
Yeah.
I'd love to see something happen there. I don't know if you've thought about that.
Well, what was it, a couple of years ago, a couple of fellows in town created their own trail, and that was taken out because it was done illegally and without permits. And that was because it was an unmet need, and they thought they could go ahead and put that in. And I do ride my road bike down 82 through Shale Bluffs, but I tell you, it's not so scary in the sense of the traffic, but the shoulder is always gravel, and there's always debris along there.
Yeah.
But to be able to, there's got to be a way to make that connection. That is a missing link. I mean, that's truly a missing link in the county to go from, because then you'd have more people on the trail and not so much driving their car or taking transit.
I hear there's a new company that's cleaning the highway up for us.
We're gonna send their signs to Snowmass Village.
Oh,
George?
Yeah, just a follow-up. Because, John, I know, looking at what, your history and having worked with you, that you are concerned about preserving open space and wildlife, but, and I also would consider you as a strong advocate for recreation. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but that's how I would sort of perhaps frame you, and I don't know if that's unfair or not.
Well, you know, I think I've been on pretty much every trail, road, Nordic track in the county over my 40-plus years in the valley. And being a recreationist, I do understand the pressures, having explored all these places and enjoyed them for most of my life. But without open space and without those parcels, we wouldn't have those trails. In order to be able to preserve the open space, I think that's very important. Do we have to have, and that was the question earlier, do we have to have trails in the open space? No, not at all. I mean, I've been involved in several open space issues in Snowmass Village where we decided not to put in trails. And I think it's important to have the recreation component to the open space and trails, but am I saying we got to go out and build single track everywhere? No. I mean, that was when we did Sky Mountain Park, we were very diligent on where we were going to place those trails. And I went out there with Austin Weiss and Jeff Woods, and we trampled up and down that ridge line in trying to be cognizant of where the wildlife was, where the endangered species were, where the vegetation was, and not disturb them, and yet have the open space and still have the component of the trail at the same time. So am I recreation? Sure. You know, I love being out there in our wonderful country, you know.
Yeah, thanks.
So I've always thought that one possible way to deal with overcrowding issues or aging issues where people, octogenarians, want to go up and ride bicycles where they always did, is to have virtual reality where someone is on their bike is plugged into where they're riding. So you could ride up through Hunter Valley sitting in the comfort of your home, and it gets more and more difficult on the steeper places, and somebody would actually ride a bike up there and be filming it, and then in the comfort of your own home, where if you have a heart issue or something, you're going to be easy to rescue from there.
Greg can do the filming.
That'll be in the open space AI department.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so I'm going to get back to the Open Space Board. So we have a time frame here. I think we have someone we have not asked if he's going to reapply, have an interview with, and then I think we have some more applicants that we have heard are interested in applications. So it'll be a while till you hear from us, John. I just don't want you to go, when am I going to hear?
Yeah, no worries. I mean, like I said, I'm happy to be back into the open space world. I mean, I would really enjoy being part of that board, and I've worked with them over different things over the years. And so, you know, with Graham and...
We know they know who you are.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing.
And one thing we did check into, we had been sort of under the misunderstanding that anyone on our Healthy Rivers and Streams Board or on the Open Space and Trails Board couldn't serve on other boards. And so we checked into that, and actually it's only the Healthy Rivers and Streams Board that has restriction. the one restriction was you couldn't be an elected official
Right.
from the city or county
Right,
and
right.
serve on the Open Space and Trails Board.
Yeah, see,
So
that
we
was,
clarified that just to make sure.
okay, yeah, because I was on the Snowmass Council until 2012. And so I was term limited on that position, so.
Well, it's nice to see you.
Well,
Yeah, so
thanks for
thanks for
coming.
coming in, John. We
to meet
appreciate you applying, and you are the first one we have interviewed, so
Okay.
it's gonna take a little while to work through this, but
No
we'll
worries.
be getting back to you and let you know.
Okay. Well,
Thanks,
thank you
John.
very much. I do appreciate your time.
Thanks for coming in.
Thanks.
And Charlotte did confirm there's no term limits on either of those boards.
Okay, yeah, okay.
We talked about
I
it
remember
late.
that, yeah.
Greg brought up his campaign.
And
Brought that up?
In your campaign.
First one?
now we're jumping around on, going back to our 2:15 time slot
Is that driving
That
you
just-
crazy?
at 3:32. So,
Has it been crooked all day?
talking about the climate action plan, and Zach, thank you for being flexible on
You got it.
adjusting your day.
Procedural question, do we need to phone Cindy in?
Yeah, I'm doing that right
Okay, great.
On the agenda.
Phone her in?
now. Yep, she's working from home tonight, but she wanted to participate in this
Got it. Oh, is your mic on, Zach?
This one has a red light on.
Yeah, he's coming in loud and clear on
Maybe it's
my
Phyllis.
Mine's
hearing
red.
aid, so.
I have a red light. So,
Is mine working?
Hers isn't working either.
Welcome to Hangouts Meet. Enter the meeting pin followed by the pound key. Thank you. You have joined the call, but you are the only one here.
Well, hopefully she'll be in. I guess we'll hear when she joins. All right.
Hi.
My name is Zach Hendricks. I'm the Climate Action Plan Administrative Assistant, and I'm here before you today to discuss overarching climate action goals for Picken County. I'm going to start by giving a rough background of climate change and its impacts on the valley, as well as a little bit of the country. We're going to do a brief summary of the 2017 Climate Action Plan and what was accomplished, and then we'll move into the 2020 Climate Action Plan update. And hopefully we'll have enough time for you to have a robust discussion at the end of that about what you would like our Climate Action Plan goals to be. So to begin with, we're going to go into the global repercussions of climate change.
You have joined the call, but you are the only one here.
To begin with, since 1910, globally we've seen a 1.5 degree Fahrenheit increase in temperature as of 2014. But to put that in perspective, Colorado has actually seen a 2.5 degree Fahrenheit increase, so our region is a little bit more sensitive to climate change and its impacts. As well as that, you can see on the left there is a map of temperatures over the past. That baseline there is 1971 to 2000, so that's the average. And so you can really see that escalation there in the 1990s going up. And that dark red line is Colorado, and you can see that we are really feeling it a lot more than the other regions that are experiencing it. And then on the right there are the emissions projections. So they have a number of projection models ranging from high emissions, which is the red line, to low emissions, which is the blue line. As you can see from the black dots, which are the actual data points that they had accumulated at the point of creation of this, the path that we are on is the high emissions. Though there has been some slight improvement in this, I think we're still pretty close to following that. The one thing I would really like to point out is the low emissions projection actually has the assumption of a net negative emissions by about 2070. So it has some pretty radical assumptions, and we have a lot to get there if that's what we're hoping to accomplish. Going forward to what we're experiencing in our region, so the graph are actual data points from Aspen. There are 2 stations, so that's what that gap is. That's when they switched the stations where they were reading it. But the projections are for the western slope as a whole. It's hard to do projection models on a very granular detail, so they do it for broader regions. And what I'd like to point out is that since 1940, we've experienced a 2 degree Fahrenheit increase here. But if you look at those projections, we're seeing anywhere from a 5.3 degree Fahrenheit to a 9.7 degree Fahrenheit increase by 2100. So we're looking at a pretty sizable shift in our average temperature. And the other important point to point out here is that the majority of this temperature shift is during our minimums. So our winter temperatures are getting warmer a lot faster than our summer temperatures are, which has a lot of impacts for the tourist industry here, and as well as snowmelt, which is incredibly important to the sustainability of our region. This ties into our frost-free days. So you can see that we're losing we're gaining frost-free days, which is essentially losing days of winter. So on average, we've lost 23 days, which is about a month of winter is what we're losing there. And the important part of this is earlier snowmelt has a profound impact on our fire risk. So on average, those earlier snowmelt dates than the average snowmelt date suffer 5 times more fires than a regular year. So that loss of snowmelt and that loss of winter has a profound impact on those risks that we see during the drier seasons.
I'm sorry, Zach, can you just tell the difference between the green graphs and the blue graphs? Here, one is frost-free days. What's the other one?
They're both frost-free days. So this is kind of just a prettier bar graph on the top there, so you can just see the total frost-free days. The bottom one is actual readings of it, and then they have the summation in the bar there below it.
Okay, thank you.
And the last part of this is precipitation, which is pretty important. This includes snow and rain. The bottom left there, you can see that's the peak river flow that's taken in Glenwood Springs. So you can see that the Roaring Fork River has been declining in peak river flow. Our total precipitation is actually projected to increase overall. That's because warmer air tends to hold more water. There's a lot of other things that go into that as well, but that's kind of just a very rudimentary way of looking at it. The two on the right are important because the increased precipitation isn't strewn out broadly. It's very consolidated, so we're going to see more extreme weather events. And then the top there is the number of days between each precipitation. So you're actually going to see longer dry periods and then more extreme rain periods. And so that means that on one hand, we're going to be testing our water supply to provide water to our population during those dry periods. But then we're also going to be testing our stormwater management system when those large precipitations fall. So that's just a brief overview of climate change and what we're experiencing. I'd like to thank the Canary Initiative, who are here today, and the Global Change Institute of Aspen. They provided all of this data. You can see the table there just kind of has a rough summation. And really what I want to get at from this is that there is the future problem. We need to reduce emissions to prevent more drastic changes happening in our climate. But there's also the imminent impacts that we're already experiencing. We're already seeing those increased precipitations. We're seeing those drier periods. And so there's kind of that two-pronged effect with what we need to address with climate change. Moving into our 2017 Climate Action Plan and what we accomplished with it. We were really fortunate to have a lot of buy-in from the departments that were part of it. That was Public Works and the landfill, Environmental Health and Public Health, the Community Development Department, and the airport. The airport was the only one that didn't get a sizable portion of it done. That's largely because, as you all know, they're in the process of determining what their future is going to look like there, and so they're addressing a lot of it there now. And I'm going to let the people who are here, the directors that are here, talk to what they accomplished over the last 3-year period, but I will point out that every single department that participated completed about half of all of their action items, so they made substantial progress. And then obviously public health and environmental health aren't able to be here today because they have some pressing concerns to address. But we're going to begin with Kathy Hull and Brian Pettit to inform you on what they accomplished in the last 3-year period.
Would you like me to go? All right. Well, the landfill, we've been pretty busy since 2017. Is my mic on?
Yes, it is.
Okay, can see it. So a lot of what the landfill does is, environmental beneficial things. Is that, picking county, we very supportive of that. So I'll just go down our list that Zach provided. So the new waste and recycling ordinance that went into effect a little over a year ago. It's pretty successful. We didn't have a lot of pushback on it. I mean, a few handful of complaints. People were paying more for trash. But it's driven people to curbside collection of recycling, which is much more efficient than the drop-off centers that were here in Aspen and Willits. So it's a more efficient process. It's gotten people, because of the variable rate pricing, the 3 different sizes of trash can, it's gotten people to think about what they throw away, be able to reduce that size of trash can. Increasing compost. People realize that food waste, if you divert that, that really saves on your trash. You can go down. So food waste separation has grown. And that goes into the compost program. We had planned to expand the compost pad at the landfill this year. However, we got bids. There's a large hillside that comes down into the permitted compost area. That was about $800,000 to remove. So we're slowly chipping away at it. So we use that hillside. We pull away from that hillside for daily cover for the trash. So we decided to kind of chip away that on our own, and the guys are making good progress on that. So hopefully 2021 we'll look to expand the compost pad. However, compost did grow. Overall compost increased by 5% of the materials we brought in. Food waste increased from 2018 to 2019 by 20%. So that is really great. So that's good. Food waste, organics in the landfill, that increases greenhouse gas emissions in the form of methane. So we're working hard to keep organics out. Let's see, the expanded diversion programs, those continue to be a success. They continue to grow. We almost 1,300 mattresses last year. 2.6 tons of books went to the program in Boulder for use into low-income programs. They also sell the books through a broker to support that low-income reading and book program. 41 tons of textiles. It never slows down. It always amazes me that we get all these clothes in. But the average American disposes of 80 pounds of clothes a year. Who knew? Electronics. 74 tons of electronics were recycled last year. And then we, at the landfill, brought in almost 1,200, almost 1,300 tons of recycling, single stream. Waste diversion plan, diversion goals. This is looking at our construction and demolition debris ordinance. That, as we talked about, is rolling out. We started the tiered pricing program in January, went into effect last week. And then the actual ordinance or code language will be before Board of County Commissioners April 8th. Shredded tires as alternative daily cover. We take in tires. It's illegal to throw a whole tire away in the state of Colorado. Last year we collected 6,600 individual tires. We don't send them to Denver any longer for recycling. Those markets just aren't good. So state of Colorado recommended we send them to Craig. They get shredded, brought back to us, and used as alternative daily cover on the trash. It's not a lot, it's a few days, but that right now is the best option the state thinks is for us being on the western slope. The state of Colorado has also reinstituted the tire rebate program so that use as daily cover is considered a beneficial use, so one of their lower tiered, but we will get some money back to help cover those costs. So that takes effect. We should start seeing being able to apply for the rebate sometime this summer. And then one other thing that's come up today, well, let me go in the landfill expansion. That is moving forward, the north expansion. The state of Colorado has given us back comments. We are addressing those comments and questions on the expansion plan. I expect to have those back probably in the next few weeks. If that meets the state's, they're happy with our response. It'll go to public comment. I believe it's a 30-day public comment period on the expansion. And then after that, the state will release our permit. That's exciting.
Cool. Let's do we should do questions one area at a time. Yeah. So does anyone have questions for Kathy on the solid waste?
I would love just to explore the having learned my fun fact of the day is that compost has more energy density than what's coming from the sun. Is there any way to capture the energy from compost? And actually, if we expand our compost program, is there a way to, maybe there's an energy source there that might be worth investigating?
Yeah, larger programs do encapsulated compost, where it's actually enclosed and the methane released, or the carbon heat generation from the compost, they'll capture that and actually make energy. Ours just isn't that big.
Not big enough.
It's about 12,000 tons a year, so it's just not that
Now,
big yet.
if the
to
city
do.
were to join us and start, composting all their restaurant waste, if they ramped it up, I think it would increase it pretty dramatically, but might still not be enough.
Probably not, yeah. Anaerobic digesters are another one that compost goes into. Just not enough. We get approached a lot about putting an anaerobic digester at the landfill for compostable organic waste. Just not enough.
So Greg, does that mean, since I use so much compost in my vegetable garden, that it's gonna bake my potatoes?
Put it on your solar panels.
Oh, okay. I know.
Kelly.
Energy saving.
Thank you so much, and congratulations on all these great achievements.
Thank you.
I'll ask you, and I'll pose this for, I guess, everyone who comes before us, but, given that you're the expert in your field, and, the county at our retreat has decided we're going to use climate change as sort of the lens with which we view all of our activities, what do you see as kind of the best, boldest opportunities to make headway in your sector for climate change?
For landfill, I would go with compost. It stays local. Getting it out of the landfill reduces landfill gas, which is methane, which is 30 to 60 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So that, and then it goes back into the soils. It helps with water retention in the soils. It just helps improve our soils. So that is probably the greatest thing we can do as a local community.
How much did we sell last season of compost?
We sold about all of it, 3,000 to 4,000 tons. So we
That's a lot.
sell about everything we make, because it goes down in volume once you cook it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
But I know it's a great product, and people are hearing about it more and more, so I think we're only gonna have more need.
Mm-hmm.
And just a follow-up question to that. So a 20% increase in food waste diversion, is that all going into compost?
Correct, yes.
Okay, great. Yes. Okay, thank you.
Have you done any studies, or are you aware of any of the CO2 emissions from a compost pile? I'm just curious. They've done studies when they plow a field.
Mm-hmm.
The CO2 emissions from a plowed field just shoot up exponentially.
We haven't done it personally, but there are studies that have been done nationwide. It does create some CO2, that's just a natural biological breakdown, but not nearly as much as a landfill gas methane generation, yeah.
I would think that in the process of creating the compost, basically you're making dirt, and it's more or less a stable form of, it's sequestering the CO2 to some extent by making the dirt.
You're right, and you're capturing that carbon and it's going back into the environment. So, yeah.
And then if we can get the compost to good uses where it's really, then it's all going into the woody products of plants, or being incorporated into plant material.
Right.
That's the
Take
ultimate
oxygen, yeah.
best
So.
result.
So how can we increase that 20%?
Well, we're working on it. As I said, the waste and recycling ordinance, I think, was a big driver of that. And people realize, I get food out of my trash, I can go to that small trash can easily. So we continue, we budgeted again for 2020 the scraps program, which is our push. We are working with the airport. They want to improve at the airport in the terminal and the offices, so I'm meeting with them tomorrow. We're going to improve their recycle bins and at least start compost in the back offices. And
What about the municipalities? What is their effort?
City of Aspen, I know Tory is pushing to require restaurants and stuff. I don't know where he stands on that, but he's making some headway, and that's probably where we need to go.
So I was thinking.
Yeah, to take it to that next level.
We need to know what we can do as an elected board to help encourage other elected boards to do that.
Well, I was just in Whistler a few weeks ago in Canada skiing, and their resort, we stayed in a little condo hotel, and on the kitchenette counter was a compost bin. And in the hallways of their hotel was a compost. So, yeah, I mean, just requiring that, it's doable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask, just shift it just to plastics recycling? I know I've been approached by at least 2 people with companies that want to take plastic and repurpose it. And I'm just wondering, is anything coming forward that seems viable for you?
We did meet with one of the gentlemen you sent towards us. Yeah, we're more than happy. The problem is getting it, because we're single stream, everything goes into one. But Waste Management in Denver and the other one, Alpine, they'll be more than happy to sell them plastic already separated.
So separation, so is single stream still a good idea?
Yeah. It makes it easier. The volumes are up. Plastic's struggling right now, makes paper struggling. But we're seeing a trend where actually China's coming in and investing in plants to get the plastic in a form kind of almost like a raw material that they want it in, used for manufacturing. So I think in the next couple years, we'll see a bounce back of those markets. And
I know that in some countries they have really intricate separation programs. And just wondering, has that been tried here? Does it make any sense? Do you think it's moving away from that, is what I hear you saying?
We used to do that. We used to have source separated when it was at the Rio Grande. There just isn't really, Eagle County is a very small processing facility. Like Denver is the main hub for the 2 big processing facilities, and they're all set up for single stream. So I think we just keep on with it.
Great, thank you.
Okay, we could, George, go ahead. We'll have that, his be the last question for now.
It's, one of the key discussion items on this list is to make Pickens County operated buildings and activities net zero by 2040. So speak to that in terms of what you're doing at the landfill and all these other departments in terms of utilizing renewables and solars, because I think at some point, if we want to try to reach this goal, we're going to have to look at a fairly series of solar arrays or a large solar array to meet our needs.
Mm-hmm. And funding.
I do just want to clarify, those 7 in there are just example language. Those are not goals specifically that I'm saying that we want you to. I was just trying to give you some framework around it. We've been in discussion. I've been in discussion with many of the heads and talking with facilities. The 2040 might be a bit overly ambitious for our operations. We both have the industrial equipment that we're doing as well, and then some of the buildings that we have, the renovations that we'll take to get there are going to be fairly expensive and fairly lengthy to implement. So while there are numbers in there, I would just caution holding those numbers as a fixed thing that we're proposing to you.
Yeah, that's fair, but again, each department is doing some things in terms of renewables. So for the landfill?
So yeah, we have a new building coming. It just went into permitting, so that is planned to have solar on top of it. Many landfills throughout the country are starting to put solar on the actual landfills, but we have to wait till we close. So that's
And then
a
create the
possibility.
infrastructure to support that.
Correct. So I think in hopefully 40 years when we close the landfill or longer, we'll be set up very easily to put solar.
So the solar solar panels that you're going to be putting on your new building, will that just offset the energy for that particular building, or will it create
Offset a
additional?
portion of it.
Just a portion of it?
Yeah.
It's tough.
Yeah.
And so I'll just do the public works quickly because it ties in with what George is asking, which we did install a 103 kW system on public works through this process and through this plan. And at that same time, we bought 5 fully electric vehicles, 2 Bolts and 3 Leafs, and we installed 3 electric chargers at Public Works that are being used on a daily basis by the public, 1 level 3 and 2 level 2s, a total of 5 spaces. The other thing the board recently did was to enter a partnership with Holy Cross where they're going to install 4 charging stations at Buttermilk and 8 total spaces, and that'll start this spring. So those are the things we are doing from a renewable standpoint, George.
Yeah, great, thanks.
After Public Works, I think Ellen is going to speak to what planning has done, then I'll cover building, and then we'll move on to the goals discussion.
Ellen, you can just grab that mic and slide it over if you want. Or you can, yeah.
You can do that.
You can slide over.
Thank you. So the pie chart on the graphic in front of you shows that 53% of the greenhouse gas emissions that were emitted in the county, this is a 2017 number, were emitted by buildings, specifically residential buildings. And so that, yeah, that falls right in the lap of community development. And we've done several of the items on our work program list here. One, the greenhouse gas emissions inventory was updated in 2017. This pie chart is the result of that inventory update from 2014. And we also followed up, we went beyond the recommendation in our work program to update the land use code citing improvements. We actually completely revamped our renewable energy provisions in the land use code, revamped and updated to try to provide more incentives and remove obstacles relating to the use of renewable energy sources as an alternative to use of the non-renewable energy sources that emit more greenhouse gas emissions. And I will let Zach speak to the building, to the energy code, but just say that as a result of a significant public outreach effort that resulted in our land use code revisions, we also got a lot of feedback on how to update the energy code to address greenhouse gas emissions, and Zach will cover that.
So speaking briefly to building, the energy addendum was adopted in 2017 by Brian Paul. He's currently in the process of updating that as well with the REMP rewrite. That will hopefully be before you soon. With that, we are looking to start pushing buildings to net zero by 2030, at least new buildings net zero by 2030, and we're going to do that with an ERI, which is a HERS rating, which compares buildings to existing inventory and giving pathways on how to build a tighter envelope, how to install renewables, how to use passive solar. It's a pretty comprehensive program, and it's pre-existing, so we're looking to use that to add to our exterior energy portion of it to start pushing buildings to net zero. And then he will be adopting the next iteration of the IECC. We skip them, as I'm sure you know, so we go every other one, and so that I believe is coming up in 2021, so he'll be before you then to adopt the next iteration of that. And then the last part of that is the landfill construction and demolition ordinance, which will also be back before you soon, doing that in partnership with Kathy Hall and the landfill. And they're integrating the Green Halo system into the new SAGES system so that when a permit is issued, it automatically links into it, and they can track the waste coming out of each construction site.
And finally, I think there's one more item on the planning side that was listed in our work program relating to working with the county building and maintenance department to develop a work program with the intent of tracking and reviewing energy uses for all Pitkin County buildings for greenhouse gas emissions, and I believe Jody will cover that under discussion of facilities.
Well, facilities is not included in the 2017. We are looking, so that's a good segue into the next conversation.
Good, thank you.
So the 2017 plan did not include all departments. It included the 5 big ones. We're looking to include all of the departments in this go-around. Facilities has a lot of potential. As we pointed out, the buildings have a large impact on the emissions rating. Just the sheer amount of electricity getting used is enormous, and that's a huge emitter. So we're looking to involve facilities, but as well as involving some departments who are already taking action. Finance recently rolled out their new ERP system, which dramatically reduced the amount of paper that was being used up. As well as open space and trails, they're preserving land, which is a form of carbon sequestering. So we want to recognize what departments are currently doing and include that in the plan, as well as maybe tap some unforeseen potential with some of these ones as well, or some other ones. Maybe that's creating a greenhouse emission database with the assessors. I'm hoping to sit down with all of them after getting your feedback on the overarching goals to set up a plan with them, action items, as well as I'm looking to set up a departmental climate action goal for each department. For instance, the Environmental Health Department has set a goal of having an air monitoring system by 2030 that's countywide, so it's not specific to one location. But with the increased air pollution that we're seeing coming, we get blown all over from California, it pins up against the mountains and it just hovers over us, as well as the increased fire risk, sending more pollutants into our valley. We want to have a system not only to create a baseline of what our air quality is, but to allow environmental health and public health the capacity to send out warnings when such a thing happens. So goals like that, they're long-term, they're aspirational, and the idea behind that is they'll set a long-term completion deadline, and then each 3-year climate action plan will set up the steps so they can take it off in chunks to work towards accomplishing those goals. And with that in mind, we're hoping to create the overarching goals for Pickens County as a whole, which I'm hoping that we can now have the discussion with all of you. And what I'm really looking for is direction from you on what you think these goals should be, what you would like the wording to be, the time frame of it. Are you looking for short-term, long-term, how you want it to be structured like that. Just some thoughts from me on this. I believe that it is worthwhile having 3 goals. As I mentioned before, there's those 2 forks of climate change. There's the imminent impacts that we're going to experience now. We know these are coming. There's not much we can do to prevent them. We're going to see that increased precipitation, those hotter days. So part of it will be addressing the resiliency and preparing for impacts. For example, we're hoping to do a vulnerability study with the Public Health Department to identify our populations that will be most at risk for these incumbent impacts that are coming. The second is obviously establishing a leadership role, not just because we want to be an example for other governments and other jurisdictions to follow, but it's going to require significant buy-in from our own citizenry to really address reducing our emissions and dealing with climate change. And I'm a firm believer that the best way for us to go about that is, yes, it's going to be involving them, but also setting an example of what we expect is going to be the best path forward. And it's a really easy way for us to immediately start getting the buy-in from our own citizenry. And then the last one is obviously going to be emissions reduction. I want to, again, put out a little bit of caution in giving fixed numbers on accomplishing a target. There are going to be financial barriers. There's going to be some technological barriers as well. As I said, the low emissions requires us to be a net negative emissions by 2070, which is going to require technology beyond just going to net zero. That's going to require direct air capture or some other unforeseen technology coming out. So that's going to be beyond just installing renewables or becoming more efficient. So if you assign a specific number, I do caution to make sure that we have a pathway of achieving those numbers before we just set that standard. With that, I'm eager to hear what you have to say and what you think.
Steve, can I, first of all, I want to say how proud I was of Pickens County. When we created this plan initially, we were very careful to make sure it had positive outcome, that it wasn't a defeated plan before we even started, by setting a goal that we knew was not achievable, and by bringing in those specific departments who could actually do something. And I think that's what it is inspired other departments to start thinking out of the box on simple things like recycling, composting paper towels in the restrooms. Simple measures like that, when you add them all up, make the bigger difference. And I think I'm very proud of the fact Pickens County took that course. It is difficult to say we're going to do X percent by X year, because in so many cases that does lead to failure and frustration, like, what are we doing? We're not getting anywhere. And so I think now ramping it up to other departments, now that they've seen the success that those departments that are already in the plan have made, I think that's going to be a huge incentive for them to say, what can we do? We haven't been part of the plan. What can we do now that we can actually accomplish that'll make all the people who work in our department proud of our department? And I think, to me, that's a huge step. So I think, and Zach, I thank you for these 3 goals, because you have been very careful about not saying we're going to do X by X year, but by saying these are goals that we can set and achieve. And as far as reading the thing about, your key discussion items, I had all these little pink notes and question marks and what does this mean? And I was getting a little nervous about setting ourselves up for failure. And all that does is get us nowhere. And I think having the positive example and role model we've had in the past couple of years to lead us forward is a huge step. So I want to thank you. And I'll let the board make other specific comments.
Kelly?
Great. So I would say let's be visionary and bold and actionable. And I'm just going to push a little bit and play a little devil's advocate to what Patty said, because, we are asking for people to make certain metrics. So we're going out and saying to our community, we want you to build net zero buildings by 2030. So I think where there are achievable metrics to apply in the various sectors, we should use them so that we are being honest with ourselves and that we are measuring our achievements along, best practice that I think is out there. That may not sum up to say from a whole plan picture, we're going to say, 80% reduction by a certain year, but I think where they exist and where they're reliable, we should use them. Would be just one offering for this. One of the things that I think we need to debate is, a net zero future, a carbon-free future, a carbon negative future. Those all mean different things. And where do we want to fall on that spectrum as a board and set that for our goals here? I'll have more to say.
Greg?
I'm not surprised.
I would certainly, just to tag onto that, happily, there are a lot of deep thinkers working on this globally, and I think it's going to make a lot of sense to follow and look at standards and stay with the standards. And I agree, an ambitious and aggressive goal is where we've been and where we should continue. One of the things that I think about the buildings we have in town that are 150 years old or approaching, that aren't our new buildings. It's going to be a lot harder to get them to energy efficiency. And so I wanted to ask you, what are the big levers that you think we could push? Or, you're all working in this and what maybe the big ticket items could be that we could really make an impact. As Bill McKibben says, we find the biggest lever you can find for climate action and push as hard as you can on it. And I want to make sure we're identifying those. And I'm not sure what they are. I'm not going to tell you what I think they are because I think you probably know better. But one of the things are just the existing inventory of buildings we have. How do we incentivize people and help them bring their buildings up just with simple energy efficiency? That's one of the things. I think there'll be a cultural shift is necessary. I know that the president of Italy, or prime minister of Italy this morning, talked about the need for a cultural shift in Italy just to deal with the COVID-19 crisis. But there are a lot of parallels in that. How can we actually make a change to prevent what is this is a long-term crisis, but how can we make a change to address something like that? And I think we can learn something from the current potential pandemic. And the last thing I was going to say on this is you talk about, how do we pull carbon out of the atmosphere? And everyone I talk to says, well, a tree or a grassland is really the best way to do it. And I really like the idea of trying to identify ways we can use natural methods of carbon, sequestration. Might not be enough, but it certainly is an easy, good step in the right direction. And I'd like us to consider looking for offsets. Like the Trees for Cities program has been mentioned. I know that's coming up. At some point we'll be talking more about that, I hope. Maybe we can identify places where we can have a bigger impact looking a little farther afield. And I also just really have to say that we've had a leadership role. We get a lot of attention. We have a lot of people flowing through here who see what we're doing. So promotion and marketing of our successes is a big component of that. I think we can make a difference. That's a lever we can push to get people to understand that these things are doable. If we can do energy efficiency and renewables at 8,000 feet with seasons the way we have, then maybe it's possible elsewhere as well. So I'm hoping that remains part of it. that's it for me for now, but this is a great conversation. Thank you. It's exciting to have you here.
So, Zach, I note in the packet, you noted City of Aspen, Eagle County, and Town of Carbondale. So they have some specific goals with some specific dates. And I wonder, when we look at our goals, for me, my question is how will we get there? You know, what's the work plan? What are the objectives and strategies to achieve these goals? And I wonder if you're able to look at what the City of Aspen, Eagle County, and Town of Carbondale, in terms of their goals, if they have a working plan, objectives, and strategies to actually achieve those goals.
So, as you can see, we have the Canary Initiative here, actually. We have been talking with them. We're also working on a regional effort as well with these plans together. CORE is leading that effort. It's still very much in its infancy. It has a long way to go to get there. In talking with them, they've been able to make a significant impact on it. I think they got to about 22%, almost to their 30% goal of 2020. So they're able to make a significant impact, but there are certain barriers to jumping those numbers. And I think Brian Hannigan of Holy Cross Energy said it best when he said, the first 70% is easy, the last 30% is incredibly difficult. And so I think the way that we've been attacking this is we take the low-hanging fruit, the easy ones, which is installing renewable energy, increasing efficiency, increasing composting. But to really reach those goals, it's going to require some innovation on our part to get that last hurdle and get there. And that is partially where I'm looking at with the departmental goals. Those are going to be a lot more specific. With the facilities one, we haven't pinned down the number yet. It might be 50%, it might be 60%. There are just some barriers there from necessity. The courthouse, I don't think, is ever going to be a net zero building. But we're going to set those targets on a departmental level, those more specific ones, to really pull those levers that we know the departments can handle and get where we know that those departments can get. And that's my objective, to reach that goal. With this overarching one, when you put everything together, those hurdles become a little bit larger. And so I'm trying to take it off in pieces with departments, and I think that's going to be the best way to get there. And then the next part is obviously going to be addressing some of the really large concerns, which is, transportation is really the untapped emitter that we haven't been able to rectify with. And the 39% emissions that we see coming up Highway 82 every day and from the airport, it's going to really take us putting our heads together and figuring out how do we either make all of those cars electric and make sure that the electricity going into those cars is coming from a renewable source. Do we need to look at other transportation options beyond just a bus, multimodal, to get people out of their cars and up here? And those are going to be some really hard questions that we have to face, but I think if we start the discussion now, we can start working towards a solution there.
Okay, thank you.
So we spent a lot of time talking about the landfill issues that is 8% of the emissions, and they did have implications for the building, the buildings and building soil. The buildings and the transportation is the big part of it, and electrification of both of those is, I think, is part of the solution. And so I think we're taking steps in that direction and working on the study at ABC in the airport on the microgrid system. I don't think it's been mentioned today, but that's a huge thing that is going to take place. So more in that direction, I think, would be important. I'm glad that Greg brought up the part about planting trees and building soil in our grasslands is huge. I think that's half of the solution on a worldwide basis. Our impact here in Pickens County can't be as great because we don't have that much agricultural land here compared to other places that is mostly agricultural land. But I think that we should have goals for our open space and trails program on the lands that they own, just for building topsoil on those. Should be part of our climate action plan. And also, I think doing, some of our offsets can take place other parts of the country. And with our, the program at the airport for offsetting people's carbon footprint, taking the money from that and putting it into some big projects elsewhere could be the most effective way that we could get some topsoil building programs or tree planting programs or stopping deforestation programs. Other parts of the country or the world might be our most effective things that we could be working on.
What's the name of that program?
The Cities for Forest
No,
one?
the
or
one for
the
your- when
Good
you-
Traveler.
Good Traveler.
Good Traveler. Yeah.
Travel
Kelly.
Good's all I could think of, but Good Traveler.
Well, and that begs, something that I think has come up a little bit on the board in separate conversations, but, I'd like to see us spend some time really trying to think about developing a revenue source or some sort of carbon fee locally, and whether we stage it as something that is optional or opt-in, such as the Good Traveler program, and roll that out in other facets. One of the things I think about is, can you come update your motor vehicle registration and pay for your vehicle miles traveled, offset your vehicle miles traveled in a year? Things like that to figure out, are we collecting the information that we need about what's actually happening here, and is there an opportunity to pay for it, and charge ourselves for our impact. So that's something that I want to include in this, I think, in a broader, perhaps work plan type of thing, but I don't think that falls into a departmental goal. So there might be another umbrella that we need to identify about either policy objectives that this board has to wrestle with that maybe don't neatly fit into individual departments.
Yeah, real quick, I think one of the biggest things that is right here in front of us is what ComDev is doing with the energy code and with building of new buildings, and making requirements for what people, it's not that you can't build a building, this is how you can build a building, and that it has to be built smart, and it has to help us all reach our goals. And I think we're gonna see huge steps, what comes out of that. So I'm excited about moving those items forward when they come to us from ComDev and from the landfill. I think that's going to be a big thing. But I think Kelly's right. We need to, if we're going to really, literally put our money where our mouth is, we have to figure out where to get the money. And that's going to be huge. The Good Traveler program is a good start, but we're not really sure where those dollars are going that are generated from our airport to offset our miles traveled by air. But we're going to be working on that too, I think. And that's something, with Greg's help, we're going to look to see where that program goes and how we can see that some of that dollars may come back to issues that are coming up with our airport.
Thank you. If I could, if you want to add on, go ahead. I'll follow up.
A different topic, but go ahead.
I was just going to say, there are models. Luckily, once again, they're national models. There's a national initiative to try to do a carbon fee program, and I think we could perhaps it's smarter to start it locally, initiate something that's having more trouble happening on a federal level, but that doesn't mean we couldn't examine starting it here. The other pet project, other than the carbon offsets with the airport, that's fascinating to me is that we may have the opportunity to be a pilot program sometime soon with carbon negative concrete, or at least carbon neutral concrete. And I think of all the concrete that's poured in construction in our valley and in the region, that's something that we might be able to take a lead on, hopefully. And hopefully by the time we bring this back around, we'll have more information on that. And that's 5% of global climate emissions is concrete and cement production. So perhaps we can actually do our small part here, but once again, show people that it's possible.
I guess I would look to Ellen and Cindy to be working with your counterparts, City of Aspen, Town of Snowmass Village, Town of Carbondale, Basalt, Glenwood, because what we're dealing with is our own facilities and unincorporated Pickens County, but where the vast majority of development is happening is within the municipalities. So Chris, you go back and talk to your planners and your council and look at what we're doing with our building code and our energy code, and I challenge you to surpass it. But because it's going to take a collective effort, and we have to get the municipalities on board. and be as aggressive as the counties, being as aggressive with our building codes and energy codes.
Can I follow up on that and just say that, what you're doing is inspiring a conversation about, ideally we'd be consolidating all these efforts and being, adopting a standard so that we wouldn't have to compare all these different municipalities and their goals, but have a standard and a means of doing something as an organization, maybe as a single entity, which means maybe there's a climate authority at some point.
So I just want to kind of sum up real quick. So it seems like you're okay with these three categories for overarching objectives. Just a little bit of clarification on the emissions one. Is something as broad as saying working towards a net negative emissions community by 2070, is that an acceptable standard for you? Do you want it to be more specific? Just a little bit of the wording on that. Do you want me to work on it and come back to you at a later date with it?
Yeah.
I would. It's an aspirational goal, right?
Yep.
Yeah, but that's so far in the future. You might as well say in the next 100 years. So it could be aspirational, but you need to sort of push the envelope a little more. It seems like everyone around the country is focusing on at least 2050 as sort of a target, and we know that in the next 20, 30 years they're targeting that because if we don't get this resolved and addressed by that point,
It's too late.
well, unless you never know what the next technology will be, right? So,
Well, and I'd like to just comment on that a little bit. You know,
Okay.
the UN's Sustainable Development Goal for Climate Action says the world has to be net zero by 2050 if we hope to
Stop this.
stop
progression.
the most negative effects of this, and here if we're seeing this happening at an accelerated rate in Pickens County, that would be kind of a, I think, minimal target, right? Net zero by 2040 might be something we wrestle with, or something in 2030, or, our core has just said carbon-free future, right? We're gonna be a carbon-free community. So I do think we need to wrestle with those ideas a little bit to be more targeted about who we want to be and what we're going to commit to.
So bring it back with more information, bigger
Yeah, and
discussion.
so that was what I was going to go, and the last part was next steps. We were looking to have this plan as a first reading by the end of June, so you could have the second reading and ratify it by the end of July. It sounds like we might want to push that back a little bit so a little bit more thought can go into it. So you want me to come back with the goal, at least the emission target goal, so you can discuss that more. It also sounds like you would like a BOCC section in the climate action plan itself, outlining policies that you can take action on or that you would like the next board to take action on, which I feel like I should probably touch base with John Peacock and John Ely and make sure we're all on the same page with that before. So would you like one work session for each, or would you like just a uniform work session to kind of discuss both of those? Don't know yet. Okay. So
plan a longer one and talk about
Bring that
both
question
of them.
back to us.
Sounds good.
Yeah, and there were several other issues that you asked us to come back for more discussion on. So yeah, we'll look at your schedules and figure out whether it's one work session or several with some specific topics to be addressed. Thanks.
And I would also, again, back to my earlier remarks, I mean, you've posted some very broad-based goals, and I'd like to see at least a few objectives of how you're going to try to achieve those, even if it's just 3 or 4 to get you sort of thinking and planning, because otherwise it's a roadmap to nowhere.
I can come back with some of the departmental goals. I have a few of them already completed, and I can bring those back. And I think I think that's what you're asking for, and so you can see how the plan is starting to be structured.
Right. Thanks.
Yeah, and looking at the key discussion items, you use the word Pickens County, sometimes referring to Pickens County right here, what we're doing with county staff, county departments. Other things, Pickens County is the broad community. And so you kind of have talked about different goals for both, but I mean, I think setting a goal for 2050, try to be carbon neutral by 2050 for, at least for Pickens County. I would like to have it be for the whole Roaring Fork Valley. So if we could leverage it with our partners in the other municipalities and counties in the Roaring Fork Valley, we could become a demonstration for the rest of the state or the rest of the world on how this can be achieved on a smaller level and then just keep reproducing it across the whole world.
I have one other thing, staff involvement. I want to make sure, we've got great staff with great ideas. I mean, simple ideas that make a difference and make staff feel good. I want to make sure staff, when you're talking about departmental goals and issues, that we have staff that, pick their brains. See what we can come up with, and let's think out of the box, because that's what we're going to have to do to solve this.
That has been my structure, is I'm meeting with each of the department heads. So the goals are not me setting the goals. It is actually the department heads setting that goal and determining those action items for themselves. I'm kind of just facilitating the discussion for
Make
them.
sure that the departmental heads are talking to their staff who are part of this team. We want to make sure everybody has a seat at this table.
Sure, I can do that.
Thank you.
We're so happy to have you.
Thank you.
Doing a great job, Zach. We're excited.
I will look at your schedules and see when I can next schedule
And
another
good
one.
luck on that.
Discussion. Thank you.
Okay,
That might be your biggest climate action challenge of all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ellen. Thanks, Cindy, who's probably out walking Gato.
So, last thing, okay, the airport curfew we're not doing today because John Kinney is next door at the Airport Vision Committee. And so all we have left is board open discussion.
And I just have one item. Tomorrow for your public comment, a member from the incident management team will be here to give you an update during public comment. So they know to be here at 12, and I just got a confirmation that they will have a representative here.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything?
And I just want to thank staff for everything and all the people that are involved in that response.
I was just looking at our Picken County open positions, and I noticed that we have a veteran service officer.
He just resigned.
He resigned just
What do we have?
Veteran service officer
Why-
posting.
Yeah, we
Brian Littlejohn
don't
just,
last very long.
Gosh,
no.
it's a really part-time job, and sometimes they need to
And
find full-time.
I haven't heard yet why he resigned or what the reasons were, but I was disappointed in that.
Well, somebody new will come along.
I suggested I saw a discussion, I was on the thread with the Huts for Vets people, and they were talking and regretting his departure, and I just
Bless you.
suggested that there might be somebody at Huts for Vets who's a part-timer who might be able to fit that role, and I'm not sure what the criteria are for the job, but I think some of the Huts for Vets people will want to have a conversation about that, so maybe they can help
Good
us find.
resource.
And I
someone.
think part of the reason Brian Littlejohn is, he works in Glenwood Springs. He's younger. He has another job. Maybe he just maybe wasn't getting enough income for what he needed. Maybe somebody who's more retired or semi-retired veteran
Might be able to do it.
might be the
Right.
one, the person that when we find the sweet spot, the person who would love the job and is able to do it and not having other demands on their life too.
One other thing I wanted to bring up, just that I saw the governor made an announcement of support the aquatic nuisance species program. So speaking of various nuisances entering our environment, there's
that the governor or
something
was
I'll
that
find that the
Bennett?
governor actually announced a
was
aquatic
Senator
anus
Bennett.
pen.
It was Senator Bennett who came
Did
out
Bennett
with that.
announce that? Pardon me,
Yeah.
I could be wrong.
He's come up with some, a bill.
Bill.
You already know
proposed
this.
bill.
Yeah, it was a bill.
It's not passed yet, but.
No,
Right,
he's just
right.
introduced it. He's been doing, I have to give Senator Michael Bennett huge kudos. This last couple of weeks, he has been actively introducing bills. The one about the response to the coronavirus that passed was amazing, and then the ones about funding public lands and public trust, forest land trusts. It's something that's needed to happen, and he is doing an amazing job. We want to thank him. And I've reached out personally to his staff, to John Whitney, and said next time the senator is available and has a chance, we'd like to thank him in person in
him.
Picken County.
That's great. He did meet last weekend with Huts for Vets again over in Camp Hale. They did a tour of Camp Hale with some 10th vets to show people
Yeah.
what they were thinking. So that's been in the news
His
lately.
staff is great. We just
Yeah.
really enjoy working with them.
That's it for me.
Okay,
Tomorrow, noontime?
everybody good? Yep, at noon.
Okay, I'll do that.
Thank you, Amy and Grassroots. We are done for the day.